Hello and welcome, everybody. It's Thursday night, and it's time to get rocking and rolling. Welcome to the NLG show. We have a great special show for you tonight, and in our center square is an awesome guest, someone who I finally wore him down. And now I can never ask him on again. But here he is.
Not for another 3 or 4
my goodness.
years.
Right. So, oh man, a great time tonight. We have a veteran, and when I say veteran legend developer, it's past, present, and future. Games, film, video, a lot of things that he's touched that many of you may not even know about. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome to our show the great Michael J. Mika. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show. I know you're saying like you've been trying to get me on the show forever, but it's like everybody has, and I'm just glad to be hopping on this show because this one. I mean, I've known you guys now for a little while.
Yeah.
And we exist and we're friends over Twitter and everything like that. But like finally to be on the show is actually pretty cool.
Well, and you know tonight, so you know I said the difference between you and Tommy Tallarico is you actually follow me. I couldn't get him to actually follow me after that. I tried to guilt him, and that didn't work. So, but no, it's great to have you. You know, what's great is it's not just game development and things like that. You share like a kindred spirit with a lot of us with just your gaming background, retro. Your retro chops are bar none. I mean. I even got the game wrong behind you. I said Defender, and I didn't realize it was Stargate. So I mean, we're a lot of us. All of us here on the show are all old school guys, and you share that with us, and I love seeing some of that stuff. I love sharing that and talking that with you. So there's a lot to talk about tonight with you, and. As we do with everybody, this isn't a Q&A session. We just want to have a great conversation with you. We want you to feel like you're part of the show with us tonight. The chat room's already shooting up, and they're already asking about IDARB 2. I'll get there. So how's your week been? I mean, you were on the phone up until game time here.
Oh yeah, so this is like a big year, obviously. We have new game systems coming out. Not only is it like the Intellivision Amico coming out, we have the PS5, we have the new Xbox, and there's some other stuff that hasn't been announced yet that we've all had our heads down trying to get stuff done for all these platforms. And so, it's been really busy. It's meeting after meeting, and then all in between those trying to figure out enough time to work on stuff. Somebody mentioned IDARB 2. Like I'm working on that really hard right now. I'm working on Stalker and a few other games too. And it's one of those things where I'm never satisfied unless I'm working on a whole bunch of stuff at once. And it's not just games, like you said. Like I've been working on some movie stuff and some television stuff as well, just because that's something I've always wanted to do. And so when it comes at you, it comes at you hard, and that's what this year's been so far. And it's only now almost February, and it feels like it's been a year already.
I know, right. I mean, the things are so. First off, before we talk about Night Stalker for a minute, panel, raise your hand if you're a Founders Edition owner.
Oh yeah!
Oh, that's amazing.
Every one of us got in. Every one of us got in. There's a guy in chat, Super Cooper. He got it. We were So Tommy was kind enough to announce that on our show 2 Thursdays ago. So we've all been just sitting there like on Friday. We were just like hitting refresh on our email, waiting for it to come in. So Peter had a little bit of a scare though, because the rest of us ordered it with PayPal. So we all got these PayPal receipts.
Oh yeah.
Peter did not.
I did not. So I'm sitting here like, oh man, and like panicking. It's like, I did not get an email. And, look at my phone. I kind of glance over Mike's PayPal message. Like, I did not get that, and it's like, oh, what's going on? And I saw it on my credit card. Like, I got charged, so that's good news, right?
You can take that to the bank.
You can take that to the bank, and it's like, you know. And I see Tommy going like, there are only 50 units left. It's like, should I order another one just to be sure, and or it should be good enough? I just let it ride, and the next day, there it was.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we were excited before we had him on, but then he exudes an energy that just had everybody, like, I was more sold on it. And then he told me you were working on Night Stalker, and I was like, all right, that's it. I said, he can't duck me anymore because we've got to duck him. So Night Stalker comprises one of my top 3 Intellivision games. So there's Tron Deadly Discs, and there's Astro Smash. So I saw the Astro Smash footage and had to have a cigarette. I saw this and just went berserk because this game took so much of my time, and I was like, I was hoping I could get to ask him if he was going to do something like, I don't know, different levels. And there it was in the video, because the game, as great as it was one screen, one level, and it got very predictable. But when you're, 12 years old, it's not that predictable. And then the multiplayer. So I want to start here because this is one of the games that whether it launches or not, and I know you said on Twitter that you were kind of aiming for it but wasn't sure. Walk us through what your vision has been for Night Stalker for the Amico, and what you're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, right from the beginning, when Tommy first called me up and gave me the first inkling of what he wanted to do with the Intellivision, I had a vision pretty much right from the get-go of, I want to create games that were the logical extensions of what I thought an Intellivision today would be if I were going back to the 80s and saying, what would Intellivision look like in the year 2020? And like that in my head was what I was trying to strive for. Like, forget about seeing 3D yet or anything like that. Like, what would my kid brain have thought games would look like? How far did I think they would go into the future? And so I started thinking with that. And then and I also had in the back of my head like a list of games I wanted to do. And Night Stalker was number 1 on the list. And I have several other games that were on that list I can't talk about because now I'm doing them. But like Tommy, he was great because it's infectious, it's contagious. His excitement for this stuff, and it was also coming off of having some time after Keith Robinson had passed, who was like Mr. Intellivision. He had owned and kept Intellivision alive for so many years. He was a good friend of mine, and every year we'd always get together and we'd reminisce about all these games, and he'd always talk about what he wanted to do, and one of his biggest dreams was to bring Intellivision back and do something really big with it. So basically when Tommy called up, I think this happened with a number of us who are participating in this and helped get Intellivision off the ground. We kind of had this battle cry of doing it for Keith. And so that was like kind of a light bulb went off, and I'm like, all right, this is going to really happen, because if Tommy is saying he's going to make it happen, he never fails at what he sets out to do. Like he's tenacious. He'll die trying to get this stuff out there. So I knew that was all going to be taken care of. And then the next bit was like, okay, how do I reimagine some of these games? Because there's going to be some new games on the system. There's going to, the whole initiative. There's going to be casual games for everybody. Intellivision needs to be bigger than just its old titles, but a big chunk of this is going to be that, because people our age, this is what we grew up with. These things mean something to us. It's like when you have J.J. Abrams, these guys going in to try to redo Star Wars and do stuff and continue that. Like, what do we have to do with these titles? And the first thing that I think a lot of developers do is they take the concept and then they try to make it their own, and then they try to like push it too far into the modern age, where it's like I can easily see somebody want to do like maybe a first-person shooter or something like that with Night Stalker with some of the elements and try to redefine what that is. But to me, that game was that sense of fear and tension that it provided when you first started playing the game, that droning pulse that's going on. The robots, the spider. I remember when I went back and started playing the game again, I'm like, why was I terrified of this spider when I look at it now?
Yeah.
But I didn't want to overdo it either.
Right. Well, and when you're 12 years old, that spider, because it stops you, and then you go, oh my God, here comes the robot, I'm screwed. And that does that, it's all dark and it's scary. And yeah, I mean, that was the hook for me too. And it was, besides the fact that the robot got a little repetitive, it's still, like I said, when you're a young kid, it doesn't feel like that. So,
yeah, and I wanted to distill it down to those things because I remembered very vividly like my emotions playing that game. I didn't actually have an Intellivision. My friend did. I had the Atari, he had the Intellivision. We go to each other's house and play games and stuff. And I ended up getting Dark Cavern for the Atari 2600, which is their version, M-Network's version of the game.
Yeah, M-Network's version.
Yeah. And but I would go over there and play all the time. And like it was we'd put the lights out and it was kind of this terrifying game. And so I wanted to do what they did. They created this tension out of very little. And so I set out to do the same thing. I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this game. I'm going to present it the same kind of way, but can I build tension with sound, with visuals the same way? So one of the first things I had done was to just get a guy running around. And I kept bugging Tommy. I'm like, do you have an Intellivision Running Man yet? Because I'm like, maybe we should use the same guy across all these different games. But they didn't have time to get one pulled together yet. So I just started throwing something together. And I started to realize, too, that like I didn't need to make it realistic. I just like these games were really strong. I'm going to use this word semiotics. I don't know if you're familiar with this word, but it's like it's the representation, it's symbolism in things that you see every day. So like old games are very semiotic. They telegraphed just by their shapes, their colors, and that sort of thing. So I'm like with this game, just like with Night Stalker and the early Intellivision games, I'm going to telegraph things by stark color, really vivid sound, and vibrant actions that you can follow with your eyes. So, because I wanted to fill the screen up with tons of action this time around. We're gonna have pace. We're gonna have like that kind of Night Stalker pace that we all know and love. But at the same time, to make it more modern, or to Jeff Minterize it, like at least I like to say, because I love Jeff Minter's games.
Yes.
Or Pac-Man, like the new Pac-Man Championship, Pac-Man DX, and those things. I wanted to kind of move it towards that direction, but still keep it dark and foreboding and creepy. So I got guys running around. I made them very brightly colored. I wanted to start off with multiplayer because that's a big thing we want to do with Intellivision.
Yes.
But then the next thing I did was create the spider, because the spider always creeped me out. And the robots I knew we could figure out and all that stuff, that's easy to do. But the spider I wanted to do. So the spider and the bats were all procedurally generated. I literally just coded them. There was no art, nobody handing me anything. I just wanted to start creating stuff the way that these games are made on the Intellivision, which was just all in code. So I started doing it that way, and once that spider started walking around, I started to get it to work. It was creepy. So I'm like, all right, here we go. Like I got that part kind of going in the right direction. Now I got to start adding the robots and all stuff. And then as we're putting sound in, I was grabbing temporary audio from different soundtracks, stuff like that. Tommy went out and he found this amazing retro synth style music that if you're big fans of retro synth, you'll probably recognize some of it. He went and talked to the creators, and he got these songs because we want to do that. And also, we're going to have them do original songs for the game. So I started putting that in, and everything just started to come together. And we had a great demo behind closed doors at last E3, in which a lot of people were coming through, and it got a great reception. We had the levels you saw in the video playable. We have competitive multiplayer playable, all that stuff. And so people got their hands on it and were able to like really dive in. And the feedback from that, I felt pretty good after that, because there's a lot of people were coming through, grew up with the Intellivision, and they loved it. So I got that validation I wanted at E3.
Well, the multiplayer is going to be I think a great key to this, because I'm watching these games and I'm thinking, my 10-year-old and I can play these. The whole rub for me on. So it's funny because I feel this makes me feel older than I am, but I'm more excited for what's coming with the Amico than I am for, I know we have the PS5 and the Xbox One Series X. I haven't really, I have an Xbox One X and a PS4, and this was the one I was most excited to pre-order. This is where my fall is going to be, is this and Astro Smash and some of the other games that we went over in the Gamescom video, and this, if this launches, this will be, I'll be streaming this too because I want to want people to see it. But I see myself and my kids playing this together, and that's beautiful because Night Stalker was one player, or at least it was back and forth.
Yeah, that's the goal. I have 2 kids, 10 and 12, and I like gaming with them. And there's not that many. When you look for them, there's really not that many multiplayer games. There's some really good standouts, like Rocket League and that sort of thing. But like, there's not just like even on Super Nintendo, there were so many, from NBA Jam, Super Bomberman, all those sorts of games. You just don't have that many these days. And I'm a huge multiplayer fan, obviously. Like I did IDARB with 8 players and that sort of stuff. And the more the merrier for me. But I love local multiplayer particularly. And the reason I like that is because when you think about, you were just mentioning like PS5 and Xbox coming out and how excited you are for Intellivision. The thing about those systems is it's go big or go home, essentially. So a lot of games are trying to show off the technology to the point that it's really hard to do split-screen multiplayer. And if you're going to be doing multiplayer, it's going to be online. But when you play online games right now, you have to contend with the infrastructure of games online. So they're very sloppy. I mean, they're great games. Like, you can play a shooter and it feels very visceral and very good. But like at the end of the day, you don't have this like really twitchy kind of gameplay because you have to sponge out the time and the feel of everything to allow the network packets to go back and forth and have a good time. So you have to slow everything down essentially. Like fighting games even are very spongy compared to like GGPO style, rewind style emulation of fighting games. So modern fighters are trying to like really slow everything down. So for me, local multiplayer game means we get to go back to the root of all these classic games and experience these games for many people for the first time, because a lot of Twitch games are really hard to come by. So there's an opportunity to throw games like Night Stalker out there and some of the other multiplayer kind of overhauls we're doing on some of the other games as well. I can't wait because I want to play these games with my kids too.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about I don't know, I just there's games that I watch my kids play. Obviously they play Roblox on their. We had this discussion with Tommy. They play Roblox on their own instant, their own iPads and stuff. Lately, they've been playing like Lego Star Wars, and they've been playing on the same. But my 5-year-old, he tries to play. There's a game on the Xbox called Trains. It's like a wooden train simulator, and he wants to play it so badly, but he can't figure it out because the controls are crazy. They're complex. So I'm looking forward to being able to hand these kids a controller and say, let's go shoot up the robots, and they can just they can just run around with the disc and fire, and that to me is worth more than, just in my opinion, and it's not everybody else's, obviously, because these new consoles are going to be very highly sought after. But for me, that's worth more, because I can let my kids play it, I can play it, and I can play it with them.
I think that's a lot that has to do with like the kind of resurgence in the peak right now of retro gaming. There's a lot of young kids playing retro games like Frogger and all these sorts of things. Arcade 1-Up cabinets are doing really well. They're almost at 1 million units sold. Well, stuff like those. The simplicity of that time it's not lost because it's all kind of coming back. And I think a lot of indie games really embrace it, and that's why a lot of those games have had some success in the last few years. But there hasn't been really a truly dedicated platform that's just focused on that, and particularly focused on that for the family. So if all goes well, the Amico, knock on wood, that's what I'm gonna do over here. Like if that comes out and people kind of understand that message, I think there's gonna be an appetite for it, and we're gonna have plenty of games for it too.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, you're working on. So he did spill the beans. You're working on 5 games, right?
Yeah.
He didn't tell me what the other ones were. But
Yeah.
Could one of them?
You know me. You know my taste. If you follow me, and the movies and the games I enjoy and everything like that. So I had a pretty strict list of the things I wanted to go after, and Tommy is awesome. Like, he was awesome. He's like, yeah, let's make those happen. So
awesome.
I was able to get the pick of the litter.
Nice. So are these games going to get announced at E3?
Probably.
Okay.
I would suspect they will. Like, there's a little bit of like having to look at the realities of when they're going to be coming out and when's too early, and also putting marketing behind games that are ahead of them. So it depends, because like, you don't want to. It's all up to Tommy and those guys. I'm not actually as involved in the marketing side, but the reality is when you go into E3, you don't want to overdo it either, because then you're going to take away from certain games that deserve a little more spotlight and stuff like that too, especially the earlier ones that are going to be coming out. There's going to be some good ones I know they're going to be announcing at E3.
Well, I want to get everybody else kind of involved here, but I'm going to ask the question that everybody is asking, and the one you can't answer, and so that's okay. Are we getting IDARB 2 on it?
We're trying to figure that out, because one thing about IDARB 2 is I want to put it on there, but there's the thing we had to answer with IDARB was that's the first game was great, everybody enjoyed it, and it actually did really well. We had over 5 million downloads. It's awesome, and it did way better than we ever anticipated. It was just this fun thing for us to do, and turns out people enjoyed it. And again, like my friend or my friends and their kids come over, and the kids actually enjoy playing it, not because I worked on it, but a lot of them actually, the other day, it was funny, a lot of them didn't even realize I'd worked on it. They're just sitting there playing IDARB, and I thought it was awesome. But one of the biggest faults for the game was, one, it was only on Xbox, really, and it was on PC as well, but like through Xbox Live, which is fine and everything there, but also the online multiplayer, only can max out at 2 systems connecting any number of people. And so what I wanted to do the next go around is solve the networking problem right out of the gate and make sure that it can be cross-play, and it's drop-in, drop-out, and that sort of stuff. And with that comes a ton of work, particularly in trying to create a networking model for IDARB, which is a twitchy game, still floaty and everything like that, which really helps it. But it's very twitchy when you consider the half-time games and all sort of stuff, and build a network model that would accommodate every situation. So if we wanted to have 8 people from different systems and entirely different systems and different platforms and all stuff all come together, well, I got to figure out how to do that very easily and quickly, and make sure the networking is so up to snuff that nobody's having a bad time with that, even in some of the worst latency situations. So that required me going to the drawing board and kind of working with Kevin Wilson here, our CTO, to come up with a more theoretical networking model that it's kind of a combination of a lot of things. It's traditional networking, it's rollback style networking, it's hardcore multi-layered prediction modeling, all this, and AI, and all this kind of crazy stuff to try to achieve seamless multiplayer in really crappy situations. So we're in the middle of that hell right now. Meanwhile, the game's kind of coming together generally, but I don't want to get too far ahead on the game side without making sure the networking is working real well. So we've been actually playing the game through Discord and distributing it through Discord.
Oh, neat.
And so we have a small group of people within the company and some other kind of friends who've been able to go through Discord, log in. And the way the networking works right now, it's kind of crazy because the entire environment's available to everybody who's playing. So people are jumping around a level, and they're drawing platforms, they're erasing platforms, they're adding like 50 balls to the play field and all stuff, and we're doing network integrity testing with that. So it's just kind of nuts. Obviously, like, people are just drawing pictures of like Garfield and all sorts of crap and everything like that all the time. It's just like it just breaks apart and just becomes a mess. But people are enjoying it, and so that's kind of informing us. Like, once we get that to a solid point to where we know that you can't break that, we're gonna start layering everything on top of that. Like the idea of editing your character as you're playing, if you wanted to, and all that kind of stuff. We're toying with all that right now. So imagine if like somebody scores and you just go to the character area really quick and you put a frown on your guy instead of a happy face or whatever. It's like it'll just change live and stuff like that. Or have a whole bunch of different sprites ready to go, and you can kind of emote by switching which sprite you want for your character. All that kind of stuff. It's all being built in right now.
Oh, very neat. So is there a kind of release timetable for it?
Our goal, I don't want to don't hold me to this.
Would not.
Our goal is to also be out this year. So all that work's going to pay off hopefully really soon. Although today I was just pulling my hair out over some things. But if all that comes together as it's looking like it's going to right now, then I think our goal of getting out by the end of the year is a good one, particularly because you can see the timing, right? So there's a whole bunch of new consoles, new software is very, it's a good time to be out. So we're going to try to do that. It's also going to be very busy for everybody. So sometimes we can have a game ready as early as like October, and there's no way you can get it on the store until the next year because there's so many games in the pipe. That happens, but we'll see. We'll see where it lands.
All right.
Nice.
We're talking right now with everybody saying that we want to be out by the end of the year. So we're trying to get our position in the queue just to be ready.
All right. So you said there was kind of a difficulty to trying to maybe bring this to the Amico. Other than the working on the online multiplayer, is there a I don't know, because it's 8, it would be 8 players there too. Is it just a matter of you need to get that done first?
Yeah, well, basically we don't want to diverge from our core game, and also the Amico wants exclusives as well. So one thing we don't want to do is turn our backs on the Xbox community that really embraced it and really helped put us on the map. So if we were to go to Amico, we can make a special version of it for Amico, which we're thinking about, and creating like something that's kind of unique to the Amico. And that's kind of what our thinking is right now. But also, if we decide to lighten up a little bit on the Amico side, maybe we can create something where if you have the Amico version, you have very specific levels that you get and different features in the game that only you can play on Amico, but you can still go out and possibly play online with others and that sort of thing. Which the Amico does. They haven't announced any online stuff, but ultimately, I think down the road they're planning on at least having some minor support for that.
Okay.
Yeah, very cool.
All right. Well, at least we know we can get the Intellivision characters on this.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be easy.
Yeah.
And I think like at the end of the day, we can easily bring IDARB 2 to the Amico. It's really I want to reinforce what Tommy and the crew over at Intellivision are trying to do, which is like really fill it with exclusives. So it'd be kind of be weird to try to shove that through when it's not really that exclusive.
Okay. Hey, I appreciate the honest answer. I mean, you could have said, I can't talk about it, but you did. So that's awesome.
These are just things we're trying to solve. And like Tommy and I have talked about IDARB quite a bit. So we want to put it on there. It's just got to be in a way that's going to help Amico as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So John, you look like you were going to say something, and I interrupted you twice. So I'm gonna relent the floor to you for a minute.
Oh no, I'm excited to have you on here, Mike. I mean, I realized that you had your hand in a lot of things, but I did some research and some things, and there were some things that really stood out. Some things in your career, the fact that you've worked on a product for every platform since the original Game Boy, so that was impressive. I wanted to know more about your GIMP room and your secret sealed games.
Yeah.
That, your rare collection. I wanted to know if we could, and I think one of the most fascinating stories, though, that was the hack of Donkey Kong and the creation of the Pauline character, how that came about, and some of the flack that maybe your family may have received at the time for that. And I went through all the games you had done, and even your involvement with Medieval, the 2019, and all these games. And I was blown away. I'm 47 years old. So when I grew up, Commodore 64 was a big thing with me.
Yeah.
And I know that you messed around with that. And,
oh yeah. Let's see. Hold on. What's that?
Oh, what is this?
Yes. I have my handy manual right here. That I keep around just in case.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Sitting on top of the C64 over here. I mean, I can show you. Let me see if I can do this with the camera without messing everything up. But this is like my office here.
This is amazing.
I've got I just like fill this place up with video games.
Oh.
It's like a little paradise right there.
Yes. Is that the room that you put all the holiday videos on the screens?
Yeah, I think this is the room where I put like all these computers. I turn them on, and like I have systems hooked up to every monitor, almost every system or whatever, and just put all the holiday games up on there.
I feel like we're in Al Capone's vaults, things we shouldn't be looking at,
This is my office. Like then you mentioned the GIMP room, which was when we bought our house over here in the Bay Area. The previous owner was walking us through the house, and he's like, "Oh, you'll like this room," and like he opens up the closet to the master bedroom, and there's a hole in the floor with a ladder going down. He's like, I call it the Gimp Room from Pulp Fiction. It's like, all right, like, should we go down here? And so I went down, and it was great because like my girlfriend, now wife, she was like, well, if we get this house, like all your stuff goes down there. I'm like, done, like that's easy. And so it's just amassed so many games down there. There's been it's been in documentaries and all stuff, but also it's kind of it's bigger than me. It's got its own legendary status, and we'll have celebrities who want to come by sometimes. They'll hear about it through friends and stuff like that when I've worked on some of these things. And they'll like one of the first people that came over that was beyond just like game nerds was Jimmy Fallon. And he spent an afternoon down there, and we played. I remember we played Tree Surgeon on the Atari 800 for an hour, and we watched Airwolf.
Oh my god!
Oh my goodness!
It was a good time, and we've been friends ever since. And
that's awesome.
All that kind of stuff happened. So like that room basically happened because when I moved out here, I started working for Next Generation Game Magazine. And I worked with Chris Charla and a bunch of great folks who I still work with on and off today. Yeah. And I would just start collecting. I had a bunch of stuff already when I moved out here, but people knew me as the guy who liked all those old video games. So basically, being able to talk to all these game industry people, and they learned this about me. They would just show up with boxes of stuff, and they're like, "Look, I've got all this old development equipment, or I've got all these old gold discs, or EPROMs. You want this stuff?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I'll take it." I remember one time, like, my wife got so mad because, like, the doorbell rang and there's just this dude with, like, this car with his trunk open. It's just filled with, like, Atari games and stuff.
Oh, my.
What are you doing with this stuff? And I'm like, oh, don't worry about it. I'll clean it up.
It's all those.
Yeah, I just going over some of the things you did, Mike. I'm just blown away, and even with the Commodore 64, because when I was younger, I would buy the game magazines, and it had like the source code in the back or the basic for the, and I would spend hours typing that stuff in. And of course, sometimes when you got finished with it, you didn't know if the game was going to work or not. And seeing as I was much younger at that time and I didn't know much about programming or anything, trying to figure out what line was wrong. Did I type something in wrong, or was it just printed in the book wrong? So.
So what year were you born then? That was
72.
72. I was 73. So I was a year after you.
Yeah, okay. You and I are the same age.
Yeah, I'm also 72.
There we go. See, we're all about the same age.
I'm 73. What month?
Except for you over there.
Yeah, Frank.
I was July. I'm 88.
July. All right, so you're a little bit older than me. I'm September.
All right. Because I remember my first introduction to like 8-bit computers was actually the Apple II at school.
Yeah,
and they had wheeled it into the classroom.
Those were real popular, Mike, at the time.
They were.
They were popular.
And they had two, so they had to wheel it around. And I was in third grade, and they wheeled it into our third grade classroom. And they showed us a few things on it. But I remember the light that went off for me was our teacher explaining what good computers were and why they had them. And she's like, you can do this, you can do that, you can do bookkeeping and stuff. But she's like, and also they use them to make video games. And I was a huge arcade nut, and I had an Atari and everything. And so when she said video games, my mind just like exploded. It's like, wait, this is what I need to use to like make video games. So my friend and I, this guy Charles Henrich, and I would just like stay in on recess and draw up stuff and then start programming on the Apple II, because his older brother he'd known a little bit about how to program and all stuff. So he gave him some basic programming books and all stuff. So we would stay in on recess like true nerds and sit there and work on these little games. And we would come up with like, I remember one game was called Destruction Hurdles, where you're this guy running down like a street and you're trying to jump over hurdles, and if you hit a hurdle, your head would explode. And we thought it was the coolest thing ever, and we're like, no, we're gonna sell millions of these things. And they just kept making games on stuff. And around that same time, like I would go shopping with my parents at this department store called Kmart back in Michigan, and there was a computer section. I remember the computer department. There's the video game department and computer department, and there's the book section. And so I would go hang out with my parents there, and they would shop forever, and it drove me nuts. And there's only so much time you could spend looking at Star Wars figures and video games before you're ready to go. But I discovered they had the Compute magazine compilation books, the spiral bound compilation books over in the book section. So I grabbed one that was really amazing. I still have it to this day, which was creating arcade games for the Commodore 64. And I grabbed that book. I went over and sat at the kiosk with the Commodore 64 that was just turned on with nothing in it. And I just started typing in some of these little programs. And like I learned how to make a guy run around, I learned how to do stuff, make sound. And so in like these frequent visits, probably like by the fifth visit, I had made my own version of Moon Patrol based off everything I learned from this creating arcade games. And my dad came to grab me to take me out and get out of there. And he's looking at what's on screen. He's like, "What's this?" And I'm like, I did that. And he's like, "What do you mean you did that?" I'm showing him what I did. And so a week later, we had a Commodore 64 at home. And I had that creating arcade games book. He's like, "Keep going. Just keep going."
So you grew up in Michigan then?
I did. Yeah.
Okay. I live in Indiana. I've grown up in India. So not kind of neighbors there.
Yeah. It was incredible growing up out there in the Midwest, especially with those like crazy summers and like really cold winters. In the winter, what else are you going to do but sit inside, play video games, and try to stay warm? So I would do that and program and learn how to make these things.
Now, there's just, Mike, can I ask him one more thing? Is that all right?
Keep going. I got time.
Okay. Well, I also realized that your aunt was a singer-songwriter in Nashville, and she actually recorded a song for one of your games. I know that Bob Baffy did a lot of the other for your music for your games, but can you tell us more about your aunt and how that came about and how she made a song for your game?
I grew up going to Tennessee, Waynesboro, Tennessee in the summers to go hang out with my grandparents and my aunts. And my one aunt, LaDonna Brewer, has always been a singer-songwriter since she was just a little girl. And so she ended up going to Nashville, and she would write she wrote for like Conway Twitty and all these people. And she still to this day is a backup singer, sings her own songs, creates her own songs, and writes for all these people. And so I was telling her I was working on IDARB, and she's like, "Oh, I'd always wanted to make a song for a video game." I'm like, "Well, okay." So she's like, "All right, well, send me what the game's about." So I sent her some video of it, and I just explained what you do in the game. And so they did the song, that's the Attract song when it's demoing, and you just like IDARB and all that stuff. That was all her. And she nailed it. Like, she sent it over like in a couple of days. She's like, "Let me know what you think." And I'm like, "This is perfect. Like, it couldn't be any better."
Wow. Right. That's cool.
That's great.
See, that's awesome. No.
Just totally awesome. Yeah, and man, I that's so impressive. And then I did want to know if you'd go into more about your Donkey Kong hack with the Pauline character. And I know that I think your family kind of came under some fire, but I thought it was pretty amazing what you did, and the tile layer program that you used. And just want to know if you could go into that and tell us a little bit more about how that came about.
Yeah, my daughter was 3. I would sit her on like on my lap, and I played Donkey Kong because she really liked Donkey Kong. And I'd let her play, and she started getting, actually at 3, she was getting good at arcade Donkey Kong, which was mind blowing to me because like it's such a hard game. I could never play it even as a teenager, but she really grokked it and just kept getting better and better at it. And so I'm like, all right, I'll just introduce you to all the other Mario games because you'll probably like them. So she would go through and she would play Super Mario Brothers and Super Mario World and all these things. But she really liked Super Mario Brothers 2 because she could play as Princess Toadstool. Is it Toadstool in that one?
Yes.
So she loved that because she liked playing as that character. And but she wasn't as good at all those games as she was at Donkey Kong. So at one point she's like, I want to play the Donkey Kong game again. I'm like, all right, and put it on there. But she would sit there and go like, I want to play the girl though. I want to play the girl. And I'm like, not this one. It doesn't do it. And but I'm a programmer, so it was like those things where it's like I went to the office the next day and I was thinking about it all night. I'm like, I could probably hack this. Like this is probably easy to do. And so Kevin, who helped me with IDARB, he's my partner on that. I told him about it, and he's like, well, there's all these tools, and we can hop in. Let's start with the NES version. And so we downloaded the tools, and he was telling me a little bit about it. And I'm like, oh, this is just like programming a Commodore 64, the way the tiles work and the palettes and stuff. So I just started working on it that night, and I think it was a Friday, and I had it kind of hacked. I was kind of posting about it as I was doing it.
Right.
And a friend of mine, this Adam Boyes, who was over at Sony and now over at Iron Galaxy, good friend of mine. He's like, do you mind if I like post this up on social media? No, go for it. That's fine. And so the next day, it was Saturday, and we had this charity event for my son's school. And so we're going to that, and my wife's like, whatever you do this every single time we do one of these things. You're always on your phone. Can you just keep your phone in your pocket? Don't answer anything or look at the internet or something. I'm like, all right. So we're there, but like my phone just kept buzzing. And then finally, I just like got up and went over to the side and I look at it, and it's like a friend of mine sitting there going like, hey, your story's blowing up. And I'm like, story? Like what story? I started freaking out because I'm like, I do podcasts and stuff. I'm like, did I say something wrong? Did I mention, announce something I shouldn't announce? So I go to my friend. He's like, dude, you're like number 3 right now on Reddit. And I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking about? He's like, it's the Donkey Kong thing. And so that just took off, and I had this YouTube video of it, and that just started to blow up. And by Monday, like Good Morning America was calling my parents, and everybody's just like trying to track down this whole thing. And
wow.
But I didn't realize, and like Wired said, can you write something? So I wrote something on stuff. But what I didn't realize was that this was a really big moment in games for women in gaming, because Anita Sarkeesian put out those women tropes in video games videos, and she had just put one out about Donkey Kong and all this stuff, and she was getting a lot of flack over that because she was getting attacked constantly about, from like your typical bro-hard folks who just don't like the idea of like messing with the tropes, or it's just like a agenda that's not, that doesn't interest them or whatever. And so I was blindsided by that stuff. And also, it started out as kind of a nice thing for my daughter and everything like that, and I thought it was just like nice to do. Suddenly, like, started to offend other people as well. And so all these really nasty comments started showing up on YouTube. People were finding my email address. They're finding people who knew me and their email address. And there was just horrible stuff being said by all these different people. And I ended up starting to call other people to get advice, because I'm like, what do I do in this situation? Should I take these threats seriously? Like, there were people who were like threatening my daughter, threatening me, and it was just amazing how angry people can get about a simple hack and a gender reversal. It's like, it's ridiculous. And so at that time, I got some really good advice from people who'd also had these kind of issues come up, and they're basically like, unless somebody makes something that you're really seriously scared about or whatever, most of it's just vitriol and people being jerks online. And just if they start repeating it or they're persistent, then worry about it. And it eventually started to blow over, because like the nice thing about YouTube is people can report all this horrible stuff. So like for a while, I didn't even want my family to go to it and see the comments, because there's all this horrible stuff. But people took action and started reporting everybody, and all that horrible stuff started to just go away. And ultimately, in the end, it was one of these things where, like, my daughter's awesome. She wanted to play as Pauline, and so we made that happen, and she loved it. And it also affected other people, too. And by the end of it, I was getting these really nice letters from people about how, like, it made them rethink about how they should approach designing games and all stuff. And, like, if that helped in any way to get people to start thinking a little more widely about, like, kind of representation in games, the better. And that led to me wanting to put a character creator in IDARB, where it's like, and you can be whatever you want to be. You can be a glass of orange juice, a piece of bacon. You can be a horse. You can be whatever. You can be an Intellivision running guy. Like, it doesn't really matter, because you can be whoever you want to be. And like for every game that I try to work on that I have more control over, I try to put that in there.
Well, I read about that, and I'm glad you got through all that. And it's funny, something so simple, you starting off doing something for your daughter, something involving gaming, and then social media gets a hold of it and blows it all out of proportion. And all of us on the show, we see this all the time. People can take something so simple and make it into something that's nothing. But I thought that was amazing, that story. That was one of the big things I was asking you about. And this secret GIMP room, I keep hearing about this, and I hear little things about it. Or, I mean, have you ever thought about like selling tickets, like the Field of Dreams? I would buy a ticket, and I would like to come. I would actually to tour the GIMP room. I mean, how much would that cost me?
Is this going to the category of what my friends warn me about, of like when things start to get a little scary?
Right. I've got it. He's got to go now.
Yeah, you're welcome to come out, or you can hang out and
there you hear it, folks.
People love going down the ladder. They love like all. There's so much. It's so much stuff down there.
Oh my goodness!
Awesome.
So I wanted to know a little bit more about how you parlayed this Commodore 64. I see Peter's in his element because that was his thing. I guess none of us Atari guys ever got to do that. But
no, I mean the Commodore 64 was massive popular like in Europe. I grew up in the Netherlands, so it was like I never heard about Intellivision. It was all like Commodore 64 and stuff. So
that's even really... when it was discontinued, guys. Like I think even after that, it was the brand still had like a 67% brand recognition. I mean, that was the gaming computer. I mean,
I know.
And it was as popular, maybe more popular than some of the Apple and IBM 8-bits at that time. You know,
I think it still holds the crown for being the largest selling single model computer of all time.
Yeah.
Nice.
You know, I used to go into Games and Gadgets, and I used to go look at the wall, and there'd be, this little itty bitty Atari section, but the other wall was all Commodore 64.
Oh, yeah.
Beachhead. That got me. I love Beachhead.
Oh, there were so many games back then that just they capture you, and we were in the era of one button.
Yeah.
One button joystick, right? So, that you can't get that nowadays, and everybody looks at you funny when you pull those things out of the drawer. It's horrible. But
I can't stop buying Commodore 64 stuff. They just came out with that full-size Commodore 64 by the guys. I got that in, and I'm like loving that. I have I built a Commodore 64 that has a Raspberry Pi built into it, so it's just like you turn on, but it has all the working ports and stuff. I just can't stop. And I have bins all around the office here filled with Commodore stuff. It's just an addiction.
Right. I still have my Commodore 64 and the 128 that I went to. That was a great time in gaming. I'd have friends come over. We'd play the summer games and winter games.
Yep.
And that was awesome, man.
Track and field, destroying the sticks.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Blisters in the palms of your hands.
And remember the Zorro video game? That was actually pretty tough. Zorro for the Commodore 64. I love that game.
Never beat that game.
Spiritual successor to Bruce Lee. There was a series of games like Goonies, Bruce Lee, and Zorro.
Yes. All in that same. Yes.
Yeah.
And they were all like Zorro. Zorro had that crazy soundtrack that had nothing to do with Zorro. The dun 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 dun. And you heard it over and over and over. But I pick up the key and we go, where the hell do I go? And I couldn't do anything. I've never beaten. So John, I'm coming to you because I've never beaten that game.
I played that game for hours, and I think within a period of maybe 3 days, over the course of a week, and this was years ago, I had a buddy of mine over there, and we kept swapping with the controller back and forth. We're playing, and he got tired, so I kept playing, and I got through that game and beat that game. But man, having to pick up that key and find out, do I go up and then back to the left to the previous screen, and of course the music.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
and you had to jump. You had to jump on the couch and bounce up to the thing. I mean, it was just.
And it was kind of a floaty jump too. It wasn't like real accurate. You kind of,
I mean, I honestly had a big impact on me. A lot of platforming games I make them really floaty because of that, because it gives you a lot of leeway to correct in midair and everything.
Yes. Bruce Lee was one of my favorites back then. It was so simple yet so hard that the green guy was just hilarious. And if you could get it to where you were standing above him and he didn't know what to do, and he'd just stand there and go and wouldn't know what to do. It was just that game. That game got I beat, and those games. Goonies I never beat though either, because there were parts of Goonies I just couldn't get past. It was like Zorro. I just couldn't get through certain.
Or even
parts
Conan, very similar.
Conan. What else was there that was at that time that had the Last Ninja was another one.
Oh yeah.
That that one was
isometric play. So hard.
Yeah.
Try jumping on rocks with that engine. That's horrible.
No, I could not.
In the river. I'm a ninja and I'm dying in a small stream.
Right.
That's where I played all the Bard's Tale games.
Yeah.
I'm a huge RPG guy, so
all those paper maps and
with Brian Fargo, and the Bard's Tale games, and you had to take out the graph paper and you had to map out your dungeons. They didn't have many maps,
Ultima, Bard's Tale,
so
Ultimate
that was
Reality,
awesome.
All those.
And then there were some games like Rendezvous with Rama and some other games, and some people probably like, what's that game? But those were games Commodore 64 was really hopping at the time, and that's probably that, and the Atari is probably, I think, most memorable for me. Started my gaming.
For me, the best games on the Commodore 64 were the Epics games, like Summer Games, Winter Games, California Games,
Impossible Mission.
Games.
Stay a while, stay forever.
Yeah, that was cool too. Man, so
the animation was so good on those Epix games. They had great artists. Look at those backgrounds of some of those games. Unbelievable. Yeah. And the animation, the run cycle, and Summer Games and Impossible Mission, doing the somersault. I looked at all that stuff and I just wanted to animate like that. And so I found some of my old floppy disks, and we were just trying to mimic the run cycle from Epix games. And so we have like this one game where what was it you're doing in that one? I also did a version of Aliens because like we saw the movie Aliens and I wanted to make a game. And Activision had posted in some magazine that they were interested in anybody who thought they had a good idea for an Aliens game could demonstrate. So for that, like my friend and I just day and night worked on this demo of an Aliens game, and I took the Summer Games guy that run, and I gave him a big smart gun from Aliens, and like shooting these aliens that are running at you that are also like the Summer Games guy but with big heads, taking them all out. And I found those discs. I found discs of all that stuff, and I found the very first sprite I animated, which was a ninja like in Bruce Lee style, but he had a grappling hook and all this stuff, and I found all those frames of animation like that, so I was able to save that too. But I loved all that. It was so good. The Commodore 64, you could you felt like you can do anything with that machine. Turn it on, you can play all these great games, but also you could make great games, and you can make music, and you can do all this cool stuff. Yeah. But Epix was amazing.
They were. Now, and I was able to at least play those games. I went the Atari computer route, so I had an 800, I had a 1200 XL, and then I had an ST 540 and then a 1020. And those Epix games were fantastic, but for me, it was always the Jordan Mechner games. So Karateka and Prince of Persia. Karateka was, it was so. That was my first taste into. My goodness, look how smooth this guy could run, and how smooth his movements were when he got down to his stance, and then Prince of Persia came along and just blew away anything that I could think of as to how games were made.
Did you get his book by any chance?
I did not. So
he has two books. He has The Making of Karateka and The Making of Prince of Persia, and he kept a daily journal during the development of all those games. And he has images. He has it's so fascinating to dive into these books. He kept all the a lot of materials from those days. He has all these different versions of Karateka and Prince of Persia. He shows all the tools he used to make the games. He talks about his failure to get this Asteroids game that he was trying to make published by Broderbund, and that's how he came up with Karateka, because he was a big film buff and he liked arcade games. He was trying to get Asteroids published, but Broderbund basically wrote back saying sorry, we're not going to do this. We're looking for games now that have a little more character. And so he just completely threw away what he was working on, reset, and came up with Karateka. And he filmed his dad and his friends. And he came up with the process of rotoscoping all those movements. So he would take this 8mm or 16mm film, I forget which, I think it's 8mm, and he would go frame by frame, and he would trace and rotoscope everything, just like the old Lord of the Rings film from '78 and all that stuff. He would do all that animation and put it into the Apple by hand, and created that game, which was a defining moment in game, basically game history, because that game inspired so many people, and we wouldn't have a lot of we wouldn't have Tomb Raider, wouldn't have any of these things had we not had Karateka and then Prince of Persia.
Agreed. Right. So those games, and again, we were talking about one joystick button. You had, it was so simple and so pure in that way.
There's so much drama and the incredible music and animation, and it felt like you were playing a movie. It was just crazy.
Yeah, and in Prince of Persia, when you were fighting yourself, right?
Yeah,
and you couldn't win, the doppelganger, and you couldn't. But the animation there was just going back and forth, and then finally you realized, I should just run into myself. But getting there was, all of those animations and things like that were amazing. You look at it now, and of course that's what these new consoles are trying to to perfect and stuff like that. But there was a sense of I don't know, kind of an old innocence back then with this stuff,
and a craftsmanship. Couldn't, there wasn't just animation blending or any of the stuff that just is done for you, 3D models and stuff have the benefit of having today. Back then, you were doing everything by hand. Every transition had to match up, and you stored every frame of that. And I still like making games that way. That's why Night Stalker is the way it is and everything. Night Stalker is completely 2D. I'm doing everything faked. And there's a lot of people who are like, oh, but it's still 3D. And it's like, no, it's not actually. It's 100% 2D.
It just looks it.
Yeah, no. It's just old techniques. I'm like the worms in Night Stalker. I'm using an old technique that we saw on the Amiga, Atari ST, Commodore 64, which is the chrome sphere technique. You just draw a whole bunch of chrome spheres in a line. Like if you remember that old paint program, D-Paint, you would drag a brush around and it would make it look like a big snake or whatever. I'm doing that to create the little blobs in Night Stalker. I'm doing all those old tricks to make this modern game. Because they're so old school, a lot of people haven't seen them ever, and so it's all new to them. So it looks different for a lot of people.
Wow,
fantastic!
That is. See, that makes me even more. See, you keep selling me on something I've already bought.
Well, I tell you, it's really weird because like the rest of the guys here, Mike, I play on all the consoles, and through the years, I've kept a lot of my old consoles, and of course, the direction these new systems are going. Of course, I love the things that they're doing, but for some reason lately, I've been going back, even at my age of 47. Even my wife, and she games as much as I do. We've been going back and playing these retro consoles. We've been going back playing older games. I've got 3 CRT televisions. I got like a 32-inch, and a 20-inch, and a 12-inch. So I've got my old systems plugged into those, and I'm having a blast. There's something, as great as the games are today, sometimes it seems like they're missing something, and I don't know if that's just me. So going back, and even though you've just got one button and a joystick, for some reason you're using more of your imagination too when you're playing it, and I get a greater enjoyment for that right now.
Well, it's
going
like
back and playing those old games.
It's like skateboarding versus like playing a board game in a way. That might be not the best analogy, but essentially, like when you skateboard, every time you play or you skate, there's something new you get out of it every time. You're very connected to it, and you feel every bump. You feel like so likewise a lot of these older games, you feel every twitch in that game, and like everything you do in that game is under your control, and if you fail, it's because of everything you did. Modern games are a bit different. They're more cinematic. There's a lot that is out of your control as you're playing the game, and that's fine. That's an amazing thing, and that's really cool. But I think a lot of people, want that variety. They want to be able to jump to something a little bit simpler, and that's like you look at what mobile gaming offers. I think a lot of what mobile gaming had done for the last 5 or 6 years was filling that void of just having that simpler get in, get out kind of gameplay. Because the reality is, in Ubisoft, they've talked about this at GDC several times. You can build an 80-hour game, but on average, players only play 2 hours of it. So the hardcore gamers, the gaming press, are going to talk about that 80 hours, and you have to build it because otherwise your game's not going to be measured up if it doesn't have that content. But at the end of the day, the average person only plays like 2 hours of that. And so that's where like these smaller games kind of fit in perfectly. You don't have to be a giant game and still get satisfaction out of it.
No, very much agree with that. I mean, even I pulled this out of the. I actually played a little bit of this the other day while I was waiting to see if you were coming on. I showed you this picture a few weeks ago. I still have my Death Junior for PSP. I still have a Dr. Moto over there for the Xbox. Yeah. That's what I was saying earlier. I think people don't understand from a standpoint of how much you have done as far as I mean, think about the things that are up on the screen that you've been involved in, and that's not counting. I've seen Rayman, the Disney games that you see. You guys redid the Lion King and Aladdin, and
fantastic.
I want to what
Dr. Muto right there unopened.
Yes.
Fun story about this. I was working at Toys R Us, and they were redoing the R Zone, which was their video game department. Right. So we were tearing down some of the old displays, and somebody had scrolled away a small pile of games underneath one of the. I mean, we used to do this all the time. Like you get stuff in, you're like, hell yeah, like this is gonna be awesome. I'll buy this on payday. So we'd go and like hide it under a display somewhere in the store, So
that's why I couldn't ever get what I wanted.
Yeah, that's exactly why. You check inventory and there's 2 copies in stock.
Yeah, you forget about it. You find it the next year. It's on clearance for $1. So sometimes it works out, but this was the one thing that I bought from the pile of stuff I found because I like this game.
That's awesome.
So,
I have a funny story. Like one of the last times I went out to Michigan to visit my parents, I was going through some old boxes of stuff, and in this one drawer, there's this box. I opened it up, and I found a stack of remember the VidPro cards that would be at Toys R Us. You'd look at the games. They would have the little inserts you'd pull out to go to the cage with. Pay for it, go to the cage and get your game. I found a stack of Star Fox paper because I remember going to Toys R Us and like, oh, I don't have money for Star Fox, but I don't want anybody else to get it before I do. So I grabbed the whole stack of papers out of the little thing, and I took it home thinking like, okay, no one's gonna get it because I have all of them out. I found that.
True confessions by. Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Sorry to everybody in the Westland, Michigan area who are trying to get Star Fox from Toys R Us in Westland. That was me.
Yeah. Now we know why there's no Toys R Us anymore.
You could see Star Fox in the cage, but there was no tickets.
Right. How do I get that? And the guy goes, well, do you have a ticket? No. Well, I'm sorry. There aren't any tickets. Well, I don't know.
Can't sell it.
Right. It's like you can open the key. You have a key, right? I'm sorry.
I remember those tickets. That's even back when the Sega Saturn and the very first PlayStation. I remember when I showed up when I got that Sega Saturn, and I showed up to Toys R Us, and that day I got there like 2 hours early, and the line was already pretty huge, and I was so excited. I already reserved a copy or what, and I was going in there to finalize my payment. And they had that day, they happened to have a Hot Wheel convention also. So they had all these Hot Wheel guys, and they had this, so they were coming there to buy Hot Wheels. So, I remember those little pieces of paper you pulled out. It brings back memories.
That was your guarantee. You got that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was with one of my buddies when the 360 was launching because he, for whatever reason, decided he wanted to get his from there, and he was, I don't know, like 10th in line or something, and they started going these like I don't know exactly what they were, like some kind of like pack thing. So you basically, he had people behind him who bought these that bumped them up in the line, and they only had so many elite consoles at launch, so that was what he wanted. He's like, oh yeah, he's like, they probably got a handful, and I'll get one. So the person in front of him, because they added like 2 or 3 more people in line, got the last elite one that they had on launch. Oh. He was he refused to go back to Toys R Us after this happened. But he always settled for like a launch. But
those lines were brutal. I'd get up so early and go wait for a console. I remember doing that for the DS, the Wii, the PS3. The PS3 was amazing because we went to the Toys R Us in San Mateo out here, and there were like the whole party lot was just people. And there was no way they were going to have enough systems for everybody. And we were kind of close to the front, but even then, like, rumor was they only had like 30 of them or whatever. We're like, oh, this is going to be horrible. And so it's getting close to opening time, and they didn't even do the paper system or anything like that. They were just like, police were there. Everybody's just like, it can't be a riot. And everybody just started pushing up towards the doors. And so the police are trying to get people to push back. But it was funny because, like, at one moment, though, it just kind of got quiet, and it was like Moses parting the Red Sea. All these people were just stepping away, and there's this little old lady. Like just really like brittle looking old lady, like slowly walking up to the door, and everybody just got out of her way. They let her in, and she went and got her PS3 for somebody, and then everybody started fighting after that. Everything was just like, oh, it's amazing. Wow. Like there was still civility, but only for her.
That's funny. So,
I did want to steal it from her. I did. I'm not gonna lie. I was gonna follow her to her car. But that was only a thought. I wasn't going to really do it. It was only a thought.
You should have. You would have found out that it was like some kid in a disguise.
Oh, yeah. Just peels off the fake skin. Like, yeah.
Frankie.
All Mr. Doubtfire on you.
Oh, my goodness. I wanted to ask this before I forgot, because usually I'll forget 1 or 2 things, which then means I have to have you back on. But this time I'm going to ask, how was Alamogordo?
Oh, my God.
So to set this up, I have known of you because of the Next Level Gaming site and playing the games, reviewing your games and stuff like that. So I kind of knew of you. We probably have passed each other at an E3 or something like that. But I really started to remember you after watching Atari Game Over. And I'm like, hey, I think I know that guy. And so then I found you on Twitter, and that's how we kind of reconnected. And but I was jealous because that would have been like the mecca for me to be out there when Larry and company are out there digging for AT consoles. What was that like?
It was insane. I remember, so a good friend of mine, this guy Gary Witta, who I've worked with before, and he went on to do great things. He wrote Rogue One and all that stuff. He was being interviewed for that documentary, and he was talking to Zach Penn, who was the director at the time, and he's like, who you need to interview? You need to interview this Mika guy because he knows a lot about ET, but also you could probably pick his brain for stuff because like at this time they didn't really quite know where they wanted the documentary to go. I think before I came in, they were really thinking about making it more of a mockumentary and really making fun of ET and all that stuff and make it kind of a joke. So Zach came out and they were starting to film at the house, and we were talking about all this different stuff. And by the time he was leaving, he's like, you know what? He's like, you're not the only one who is defending ET and the situation, and let alone like Howard and all this stuff. He's like, I think this documentary really needs to be more about Howard and more about like what this game really, what really happened and all this stuff. So he started to have these revelations already before even coming out, and we were just having these discussions about it. And I'm like, you should talk to this person and this person. Have you really talked to Howard yet? And here's what really happened as I understand it and stuff. So it started to take shape after we started talking, and he started talking to more and more people. And then that's when he was like, all right, we're going to come out, we're going to film some more, but also, can you come out to Alamogordo? We've got this guy who thinks he knows where they are, and we're going to just go for it and see if we can get approvals and dig it up. And I'm like, hell yeah, I'm going to go. And not only that, like my friend Ernie Klein, who wrote the book Ready Player One, he calls up too because he was being interviewed as well, and he's like, are you going to go? And I'm like, I'm going. And he's like, I'm going. He's like, I'm going to like frickin' drive my DeLorean there with an ET in the passenger seat, and we're gonna go have a good time. I'm like, all right, we're gonna do this. And for those of you guys who haven't seen Ernie in interviews or anything that very much, or whatever, like he is like the nerd Indiana Jones. Like he is amazing. He's like one of those guys that like you just want to hang out with all the time because like not only is he just like uber nerdy like us and really into the stuff we're into, but like he's a man of action. He is like the Han Solo of classic gaming. Wow. And I remember when we arrived in Alamogordo and he just shows up in the middle of like this desert in his DeLorean. He's like, I just got back from getting ET. I had to go get my DeLorean and ET from George R.R. Martin because he was borrowing it for his movie theater. I'm like, you were at George R.R. Martin's like, movie theater? He was like, yeah. And then like he comes up and like Zach's and are talking to him. And he's like, so Zach, he's like, check it out. He's like, this is my second DeLorean. He's like, I've got another one. If you want, I can just drive it. Wow. Bail out and like if it's good for the movie. I'm like, what's going on? He's amazing and he's so fun to hang out with. And so we're in the middle of this desert, and like we put the word out that we're gonna be digging the next day. And that night we went there and we're doing some pickup shots and stuff like that. And what we didn't expect though was the next day having this kind of Lawrence of Arabia line of like hundreds of people who showed up to participate in this. Like the word had gone out, we'd expected like dozens of people. We didn't expect hundreds, and like they're showing up in the middle of a sandstorm that makes no sense. It's like the beginning of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and we still don't even know. Like Joe, who was digging this stuff up, who just going off of memory and like old paperwork he had, we didn't really know if we were going to find the games. Really, it was like we had only a few chances at it, and this was like the last chance. Like they tried in a couple spots and nothing came up, and it's like, okay, we're just gonna have to roll the cameras because this is going to be either bust or we find them. And so while we're waiting for everybody to kind of set up and figure all this stuff out, I'm meeting all these people who were kids at the time in Alamogordo. And I remember this older guy, not older guy, but this older guy, he was wearing like this powder blue Adidas tracksuit. And he was wearing a necklace that he had made of all these like Atari EPROMs. and he's wearing like this ski cap. So I went up to him like, were you? He's like, oh yeah. He's like, I even got bit by a scorpion coming in here to get some games. And so the kids stealing these games, they're now on the board for Alamogordo. So that's the only reason it's happening and all this stuff. And like they were debating on the board, the city council, to do this because they know that there's like stuff that's buried in the ground that's toxic and stuff like that. So they're like, what happens if we hit one of these pockets? so we had to do all these like kind of environmental things.
Then it's the movie Outbreak.
It is
right.
Fight Atari games. Like suddenly, like the world's destroyed. But yeah, so like all this stuff's going on. I'm meeting the mayor of Alamogordo because she, like all of them, they were all kids at the time, and the word had gotten out, and they had like paved over the games at one point because so many people kept breaking in to steal Atari games that they had to pave it over with cement. So it's what complicated it even more because there's this huge slab of cement that was poured over it. And the stories that were coming out where people would say like you go there and you chip away at the cement, still try to get the games out and stuff. But at some point they said you would come to Alamogordo in the late 80s. And no matter where you went, everybody had a complete set of Atari games. They had Atari home computers, Atari 2600s, 5200s, everything, because they buried everything there. It was all the returns today. Like if you see the documentary, you'll see kind of the all and everything like that. But ultimately, expectations of what everybody thought the legend were completely wrong and debunked, and it was just the burial ground for so much just old Atari stuff.
Wow.
And and being with Ernie, I remember like every step of the way, Ernie's like, we're going to have to steal some of these games because the city wants them, and there's no way we're going to get games. We have to steal these games. I'm like, we're not stealing these games. They're like watching over as like hawks, and they're like, we had some Atari games in our hands. We're just like cracking open some like ET games. What's that?
Putting him in his jacket.
The powder blue jumpsuit, though, is what I like. I mean, that reminds me of the old leisure suits, like the lime green and all that.
Oh, he was so cool. He was the coolest guy there. And you're like, damn, this is so good. And people were showing it with artwork. Somebody made a macaroni ET, like Atari ET thing on like a board and brought it for Howard, I think. And like, it was awesome. And actually, I've known Howard for years. He was one of the first guys I ever met before getting into the game industry that really encouraged me to do it for real. And so to have him out there and see him get emotional over all that stuff, like it choked me up, and everybody there was kind of a mess because for him, he had been blamed for so many years for almost killing the game industry. And he was carrying that weight all the time. He's a really nice guy, but you carry that weight all the time. People would always like kind of talk about it and joke with him about it and everything like that. But like after a while, that just like sucks. So to get vindicated like that, one live in front of all these people who are coming out to support you, and like that, and like realizing that like there's just a few ETs there, but it was just all this other stuff too. That was a great moment to be there with him, and he's a good friend anyway. So that was awesome.
Well, that reminds me of that. When we had that big video game recession, like between 1982 and 1985.
Yep.
And like the industry, they went from like 300 or 3.2 billion to 100 million. They lost like the revenue went down, like 97% or whatever. And of course, that's when the Nintendo, in 85. They played a big role, I think, in the video game industry coming back, and I'm glad to see it. But at the time, I remember 82 through 85 because the whole market that's when things were saturated. There were a lot of PCs, of course. There was kind of a waning interest in the consoles because you had the Apple, IBM, you used to have all this PC movement. But I'm glad that consoles came back, and I thank Nintendo for that back in 85.
Oh, they had a huge hand in that. And like the reality was the market was oversaturated. Yeah, there's a great documentary online that talks about a Magic. You can look for it on Google. It's like the story of a Magic, and you can see they chronicled the days of them trying to go public and then aborting doing that because they're realizing the market's tanking. Yep. And so many people were trying to do so many things at the time. And for me as a kid, I thought it was the greatest time ever because I'm buying games for like $1 and $5. I'm like, what? I remember going into KB Toys and they would have huge tables with stacks of games and they're all $2. Yeah. And I thought like video games can't get better than this. Like if this lasts forever, it'd be great.
I rounded out my ColecoVision collection of that. And see, and that was sad because Coleco had a great thing going, and they got swept up in that because
they really did.
It wasn't their fault. They really had the best versions of almost everything out, and to this day, there are some ColecoVision games that went up against the launch NES titles that were there. And I remember I had the turbo wheel, I had the Super Arcade joystick, and I actually had the expansion module for the Atari game. So I had like the best of everything, and then it just all went away, and it was
almost an MSX computer, the SG-1000 essentially, similar hardware. And the reality was too, competing with all this was the fact that home computers were taking getting a foothold. And piracy was so rampant on those machines. Oh, yeah. Like I remember just bringing boxes of discs to school to trade games with kids and everything like that. And actually, funny story, you might have heard of this one before, but like I remember going to school before I knew how to pirate things or who had games. And this one kid, Brian was his name. I told him I got a Commodore 64. He's like, "Oh, well, do you know Mrs. Cripps?" And I'm like, "Who's Mrs. Cripps?"
Yes.
She was He's like, "Here, bring a box of discs to this address in our neighborhood at this time, and just show up and everything. Well, I'll walk you through it." So I remember riding my bike over to her house, and on her front lawn were all these dirt bikes, and we go inside, and like the first thing that hits you when I remember getting brought in, like he brought me in. And the first thing that hit me was the smoke, because she was a chain smoker. She had like this big plate of just butts, cigarette butts. And she would sit there and chain smoke and play Ultimate Wizard on the Commodore 64, like just plow through. It was like Jumpman with a wizard kind of game. And
Jumpman.
It was awesome. And she would sit there and play that. And meanwhile, all these kids, it was like Fagin's gang from, was it like Copperfield or no, Oliver Twist. There's like, they're all the thieves, all the kids, all the 1541s, trading wares and like doing all this stuff. And I showed up, I get these copies and stuff like that. And like, I remember Miss Cripps, the only thing she told me was like, "Next time you come, bring something nobody has." And I'm like, all right, well, what's that going to be? And
Mike,
so
she sounds like the Godfather.
I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse.
She was with a grab. "Next time you come, make sure you bring something nobody has." and so I was sitting there trying to figure it out. And I realized like, oh, she loves that Wizard game. And I like that game too. And they had a level maker where we can make levels. So like, I was like industrious. I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just make a whole disc of levels and show up with those. And so I did. And like, she liked them so much. She's like, anytime, come here, you get whatever you want. Anytime. Yes. And her grandson ran a bulletin board system back in the day, pre-internet. And day wears bulletin board system for the Commodore 64. So like, I got primo games as a kid.
So it's funny you mentioned that. I ran a BBS on my Atari 1200 XL, and I had the War Games acoustic modem, and so I'd call up these other places, and I'd go to download like Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and back then at 300 baud with not Procom, but it was like pre-Procom. When you downloaded something, you saw the code going across the screen.
Yeah. Right.
So I would just sit there and I would watch. And I'll never forget it. I asked my parents for a 1200 baud modem, and I said, if you get this for me for Hanukkah, I will never ask for another Hanukkah gift as long as I live. And then getting that, and then watching the line just go shoom 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 shoom. And I'm like, I'm getting games. And I don't know.
Matrix.
You would up and go to bed and like
it was like the Matrix. And I don't know what you guys had to copy with, but on the Atari, when we had the floppy drive, we had a mod, because you could mod stuff back then, called the Happy. So I had the Happy drive, and so I was kind of the ring guy. So everybody came to my house. So
with Mr. Fast Hack'em. Fast Hack'em was the disc that gave you all you needed to hack any game, copy any game.
Yeah,
I had that on the Commodore 64, I believe, and you could. I'm guilty of that too, because pirating, that was a bit. I mean, I had hundreds of floppies that I copied from friends, all kinds of things. But that Fast Hack'em, it had a list of games. You'd boot it up, and you could select the game, and you'd put in one disc, then you put in your other disc you're writing to, and this process would go back.
We didn't know we were breaking the law. Like, I didn't know that was bad. I was just like, everybody did it. It's just
we were kids.
Where you get games.
I didn't know. I mean,
that's why that system was so popular. I mean,
I mean, who would have thought breaking the law would have been so easy, though? They made it. I didn't know.
Yeah. Like, this is what you do. Like, this is amazing. So it's like, when you think about that and like how many people were copying, it's no wonder a lot of people just slowed down on buying cartridges and stuff like that. Because it's like, oh, I can just go get 100 games. Like, if I buy 10 discs or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
It was nuts.
And then it was double if you
make them double-sided with
exactly with your little
yeah.
Notch.
Well, you get the notch. They had the special notch thing that you can get for the floppy disk too, which is amazing.
Right.
Well, but I used to take two of them and line them up backwards, and then take the hole puncher and hole punch it, and then I take the scissors and finish it off. So mine were never exactly square. But it worked.
It did.
It worked.
So, it was magic.
It was. Magic
it's almost twice as much to get double-sided discs. So you're like, oh, you're telling me I just have to cut a hole in the side and that can do 2 sides? Okay.
Yeah. Hey, so I don't know. Do you emulate any of that stuff now?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of. We're working on a project right now that has Atari 800 and Commodore 64 emulation, and the Commodore 64 is a very hard machine to emulate. So is the Atari 800. Compared to like later hardware, they were so timing. Basically, timing is everything. So as you count cycles as the beam goes across the screen, like with the Atari 2600, things have to happen at a certain time. When you get to a system like the Atari 800 or the Commodore 64, it's multiple chips that have to do things on very specific times. So it makes it really challenging. And then trying to get audio to sound as good as it does out of a C64 through an RF modulator, because that was designed to do that. So you can get raw sound like you do off of Vice and all these emulators, but it doesn't sound exactly like it did when it came through a television through the RF modulator.
Right.
So we have to process that audio in a way that tries to approximate that sound, because the reality is, just like with graphics, like when you look at an Atari 2600 game on an LED or whatever, you see very harsh edges and everything like that, but that artwork was designed to be processed to a CRT, and it was designed with all that in mind. So the artistic intent was to make things look rounded, or to make it look like tires are spinning, or all these different things. And like when you look at it on LED with a raw image and a video signal coming through, you don't have that effect. It's like the popular thing that everybody talks about is the water in Sonic the Hedgehog. How on a CRT it looks like translucent water coming down, but on emulation it looks like a whole bunch of just like pixel lines and stuff like that.
Right.
The techniques you would use on these old machines to produce extra color or to soften edges, to anti-alias and stuff like that, is lost on modern displays. So we have to go in there and try to figure out how to make that effect happen and process it in a way that a modern television can present it the right way. Because artistic intent is everything we care about. And so that even if that means we have to sample audio, like we did on SNK, 8th Anniversary Collection, Ozma Wars has never been properly emulated ever. And the original version of the Ozma Wars arcade board was thought lost. Nobody has an original anymore. And we found a collector in Japan who happened to have one. And SNK, to their credit, they were pioneers of game audio. They did things with game audio that nobody else ever did at the time and wouldn't do for like another 5 to 6 years. And so one of their first games, called Yosaku, which is about chopping down trees, has this amazing sound effect when you're hitting a tree and it sounds like you're really hitting wood. That game we've not found yet. Nobody knows where that game board is. Wow. There's some video of it, so we know it exists somewhere, but we put feelers out everywhere. Even with the collection out, and we bring up the question of like, does this game even exist anymore? Nobody's come forth with a working board of Yosaku. We have ports of the game to like old cassette vision systems and that sort of stuff, but at the end of the day, the original arcade board, we only have some like old video, that kind of stuff. So like with SNK Ozma Wars, we had to record audio straight off the board because it does stuff that's not just like digital signal through speaker. It does some really analog kind of cool stuff. And all the versions of Ozma Wars that most people have played have been basically downported to Space Invaders hardware. So the sounds you're hearing are basically Space Invaders sounds that they just plugged into it because how expensive it was to produce that audio with the other board. And so
what you said, Mike, was right about the CRT televisions, and Mike and I have dabbled around because with some of our retro consoles, I've got like several different devices, but one of them's the Pound HD link cable, where you can take your old console and you can put it on your HD television through HDMI. But I've tried all kinds of things that way, but nothing looks as good as when, like, I played Diddy Kong Racing the other day on my Nintendo 64, and I hooked it up to my CRT television, and it everything does look smoother, and in fact it hides a lot of that stuff, and the way that the games were actually made to be played on those kind of television, so it actually looks better, and the sound and the image quality is actually better on that CRT.
The font used in the game, particularly with Diddy Kong Racing, but so many other games the same way, it was designed to be displayed on a CRT. The color choices that are used in the font and the way they anti-alias that font, Rare has been around forever. They knew the technique, so they made it. They basically smoothed it for a CRT. When you put that on a modern television, you see the edges, and when you look at it on a CRT, it looks super smooth and very artistic, and it looks like it has more color because the color bleed that happens on a CRT only happens there. It doesn't happen on an LCD or an LED screen. And so we have to try to figure out how to make software represent that. And there's some really great filters that people have done in the open source world and stuff, but there's still a ton of work to do because you can still push all these games through that, and it doesn't look as good as a CRT. And CRT is very bright as well. So when you look at N64 or Sega Saturn, or Genesis even, on a modern television, everything looks kind of dark and dingy. You have to do a lot of gamma correction to even get that close to being as bright as those games would look on a CRT. But all that stuff is like it's stuff that like I feel like we have to educate people about constantly because a lot of people will compare the games that we work on to MAME or other emulators, and they'll write up bugs saying our games look too bright or do whatever. And we're like, no, this is like what the real game looks like. You're looking at an emulator that has never had it actually accurate. They're incredible, and that's what they're for. But like, we're trying to simulate what it was like to play this game on a CRT or on some other kind of like properly on a device. Like when we change controls in games like Ikari Warriors, every game has always tried to put like the rotate left and right on the shoulder buttons, but like that's not the intent of the original designers. They wanted you to be able to quickly aim and shoot. So we converted it to dual analog, which a lot of people thought was like blasphemy, but we're like the original designers who we know and we met during the project. We're like, it feels closer to the arcade game now than it's ever felt. And it's like, great. That's the kind of work we need to do. And it's a constant education for folks.
Right.
So I want to bleed that a little bit into what you're doing now, because you know, you have kind of and digital Eclipse and other Ocean. Let me ask this first.
Yeah.
They're subsidiaries of something, or who owns which one? I mean, which one? Because they seem to be like sister studios.
Yeah. So essentially, Digital Eclipse goes all the way back to the early 90s. I started working at Digital Eclipse and partnered with Andrew Eyre, who's the CEO of our company to this day, at 97. And so what ended up happening is Digital Eclipse ended up merging with another company to form a company called Backbone. Digital Eclipse became a label and a brand under Backbone. And Backbone got acquired by a company called Foundation 9, which was a group of developers that included Shiny, Collective, Amaze, Imagine Engine, Sumo Digital, and all. Like, we were just this big conglomerate of developers, independent developers, who made up probably about 20 to 25% of the entire development base around the world. So we're doing all these games there, and then eventually, as any big company comes around and mobile started to hit, it was harder to feed that beast. We had nearly 2,000 people. And how do you feed that many people when mobile's hitting really hard, consoles were having a hard time with sales, and so publishers were having a hard time justifying investing in a lot of games at the time. And so I immediately was like, you know what, I want to try this out with mobile. So I jumped ship and helped start a company called NG Moco with Neil Young, who was the executive producer on Aladdin back in the time for Genesis, also produced I think it was Medal of Honor and all stuff for DreamWorks and everything. He and Bob Stevenson, who's a good friend of mine as well, big UK coders and known quantities in the UK for Commodore 64 and all stuff. So I knew these guys for a long time, and I was able to work with them before getting over to NG Moco. They wanted to kick off this new mobile company and make good games for mobile because the iPhone was just announcing the App Store, and they were going to announce they were going to put games out. And we were just doing Monkey Ball for iPhone. So I'm like, yeah, this is probably going to be big because like this already, the attention for this thing's going to be huge. So I left Backbone, went over, kicked off NG Moco, spent a year there. And then I was expecting my second kid. And when you do a startup, you're working 24/7 pretty much. And I was just hitting the grind. I'm like, you know what? And I told Neil and Bob, I'm like, I can't keep going to this. I'm ready to have a second kid. I can't do this kind of thing. So they're like, okay, that's cool. Everything was great. NG Moco did really well. I reformed. I came back to work with Andrew Eyre, who was the original president of Digital Eclipse, and he started a company called Other Ocean. He had taken one of the Digital Eclipse and Backbone studios in Canada, separated it, and renamed it Other Ocean, and I came in. And so from there, we worked on tons of games for like mobile, console, everything.
Yeah, and I'm showing as much of them as I can up on the screen.
Yeah, we'd done so many things, and already before that had done so many things like Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, Puzzle Fighter, all these things. So we'd touched so many games. We worked on Rock Band games, G.I. Joe, all this stuff, Gauntlet, and
Gauntlet.
Yeah, so we came back, and so we kind of got the band back together. And so at this point, we're kind of hitting on all cylinders, doing really well. And we're getting really nostalgic for the Digital Eclipse brand because we loved Digital Eclipse. We loved all the classic work we're doing, and I'm a huge classic game nerd. And so we ended up buying back the rights to the Digital Eclipse brand and assets, and some of the backbone assets, like Death Jr., we got the rights back for that, and all these things. And so now we have all that back, and the first thing we did is we relaunched Digital Eclipse, and we did it with the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection,
right,
and Mega Man Legacy Collection. And so those Mega Man Legacy Collection was first, then Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection, I believe, and those did extremely well. And that opened the doors for many more things we're working on now, all under Digital Eclipse. And that's the one thing that we did when we relaunched it, though, was like we really want to set a high standard for these collections, because when we started basically resurrecting Digital Eclipse, we felt very strongly that a lot of these old games were just being slapped into like really cheap collections and thrown out for cheap prices. And we knew there was much more value to these games, and they weren't being represented very well because they would have terrible controls, or they were emulated poorly, or they were just being devalued overall. So our mission statement is essentially to curate these things as if they were like the Criterion Collection. What Criterion Collection is to film, we want to be to video games. And so when we do this stuff, we go out and we find materials, we put in like design documentation. On the Samurai Showdown collection we're doing right now, we went out and we hired a documentary team to document the making of Samurai Showdown and meet with all the team members who worked on the games to discuss it. We've got another project right now where we're going into a really deep dive on the documentary side, where we're pulling up materials that we've never had before to include in the package, and also allow some of these materials to be available for research and all that kind of stuff. So it's really going far with that stuff. So we're going to have documentaries, alternate versions of games. We're finding games that are, and some of the stuff we're doing right now, we're finding games that are part of franchises that nobody knows existed. There's games that were completed that were never announced or shown that are part of some big franchises. We're finding these things. We're figuring out how we can get these to market and make sure that they're bug-free and that sort of thing. With Aladdin, we found the original source code and we're able to reconstitute some of the cut features in Aladdin for Sega Genesis. In fact, I've got right here in this cartridge, I have right here, this cartridge, I have the full director's cut of Aladdin that we couldn't even include in the collection because there was some clearance that we couldn't get through Disney to put some of these items in there.
Wow.
But this is the ultimate director's cut cartridge that we just made for the team that has all the features of Aladdin that were intended to be in the game. All there. So we're going deep with this stuff, and we're trying to make sure that we get these games in a state that they'll stand the test of time going forward.
Wow.
Aren't you also involved in the preservation of games?
Oh yeah. So like Video Game History Foundation. The reason I was late to this here, or a few minutes late, was I was on the board meeting for the Video Game History Foundation with Frank Cifaldi and Kelsey, who've been doing incredible work in that regard, and they've done so much stuff for game preservation. But also Frank works with us a lot on the Digital Eclipse side to help find a lot of these materials and dig some of this stuff up. I mean, that's an archaeological dig. We always, part of the budget for these projects is we call it archaeology, in which we're calling people, we're tracking people down, we're traveling around the world to find artwork, source code, anything that we can on these games, and make sure that not only are we trying to make a product, but we're trying to preserve these things and making sure that the license holders have copies of everything. I have copies of games and source code to games that publishers don't have that I've had to provide. And so I get the phone call a lot of like, do you have, or do you know anybody who has source code to like this game or this game? And it's like, I do.
Wow.
And it's yours. It's like, it's yours, so you take it and that kind of thing. But yeah,
it's down in the GIMP room. Come get it.
It was. I had to go to Sim City down there, and they didn't have it.
What, the original Sim City?
Original Sim City.
Wow.
What it was called, Micron, something. It was a different name. I didn't realize I had it. I was going through some discs, and it's like, I think this is that game.
Wow. The preservation part. I mean, and that's one of the things that I love, especially when I'm, when you're not throwing insane snark on your Twitter. Some of the retro stuff. I mean, I've lived some of this to an extent, but then I look at the stuff that you've done, and I'm just, I'm in awe, because we're the same age, minus a couple of months, and I miss a lot of my collection that has gone away in time. Like, I wish I could remember what the hell happened to my Atari stuff. I wish I could remember what my parents did with my ColecoVision stuff. I've tried to preserve a number of things. I was adamant about, making sure that nothing happened to my Intellivision games, my Sega CD games, my 32X game, and beyond. But some of the older stuff that I wish I had, I unfortunately, it's getting the problem with the retro kind of collector's market now is all the pricing is driving up because everybody's getting into it. So right. I'll go to a show like Too Many Games in Pennsylvania, and I'll walk around, and my wife will give me a budget, and I can't spend any of it because I can't afford what I want to get, and that's it. It's if I knew, it's almost like, you get those baseball cards you put in the spokes of your bike. And then if you know then what you knew, if you knew then what you know now, you wouldn't have put those you wouldn't have done that. You would have just,
you put in your spokes. Like,
right.
That wasn't a good idea.
No, right. But back then, I mean, how did you know? But, I appreciate some of that work. And I read on the Digital Eclipse page that you guys have an engine for this that makes this really mobile. So how did you come about that and be able to convert these old games into that?
It's really just it's a framework, essentially. We want to make sure that we have a framework that is portable to pretty much any kind of platform that can accept C, C++, C#, that sort of stuff. And so this framework, we are able to plug in different kind of different modules. So we can plug in the Commodore 64 module, the Apple II module, and we go out and we work with some of the best emulation authors out there that work on a lot of open source stuff. We bring them in to help us in very specific areas because we can sit there and do it ourselves, but why not go to the experts who've been thinking about it for 15 years? And so we'll bring them on board to oversee getting these things kind of plugged in as well. So when we go project to project, we're building a library of platforms that we can go back to and include in packages. So we're working on a project right now that has the Atari 800 Commodore 64, which means we can work on another one now, and it's not going to be as much work next time around. But also, we can give the source code to a publisher or somebody who owns the rights to these games and be like, 10 years from now, pull this source code out, recompile it on the latest platform, and sell it if you want. Like, this is yours. And so we're trying to preserve games that way, as well as preserve the original data and that sort of thing.
That's awesome.
I'd love to see, especially talking about the Commodore and the Atari, I would love to see what some of those, I'm pretty sure Broderbund is not around anymore, right? They're
Ubisoft owns a lot of their assets,
right?
As far
the
as
Prince
their
of
publishing
Persia.
Assets. They own Prince of Persia, but Jordan Mechner owns the Atari Commodore 64 and Apple rights to Karateka.
So yeah, that needs to come back.
It does.
We need to go and bang on Jordan's door and say, okay, man, let's get this done. He's on Twitter. We could just tweet at him.
Get a Karateka for the Amico?
That'd be awesome.
He's one of the nicest guys on earth, that's for sure. So he will answer anything you ask, I'm sure.
No, because I've asked him and he hasn't. Because I've brought this up before. I've asked about. I mean, these are things that.
Here's the secret: if you ask somebody something that you think is a good idea and they're in the game industry and they don't respond, there's a good chance they have something in the works.
Oh, right. There we go.
Mm-hmm. Always fall back on that.
Yeah.
Like, people are asking me stuff all the time. I'm either quiet or it's just kind of like, oh, we're not doing that or whatever. But like, quiet is usually like, oh, you're stepping into territory I can't talk about.
Yeah, well, I used to get a lot of that at E3. You'd walk, say, hey, okay, and then they say, all right, look, I'll tell you, but if it shows up on your website, I will kill you. That kind of thing. I get some of that, and I always find it funny of what companies will and will not talk about, or they say they can't talk about it. I'm like, no, you kind of. I think if you own the company, you could talk about it. I think surprise is a good way. I'm anxious to see what you are coming up with for the Amico besides Night Stalker.
Oh yeah.
that's E3. Well, I've been, you've seen me on Twitter. I've been down on E3 for a few years now, but I'm when Tommy said, "Yeah, we're going to be there. We're going to make all these announcements, and then you got to have me back on because I'll be able to talk about everything." And I was like, "Well, now I'm interested in E3 again, and it has nothing to do with Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo." So,
well, they're barely there anyway, so there you go.
It's okay. Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Pretty soon, I'm telling you, it will be. So you've been to these. You've been to them much longer than I have. I mean, I've been my time in the sun on going to E3 was between 2002 and 2008. So I'm sure you've been going longer than that. Being a developer and stuff. What's your take on where E3 is going and what the future?
I mean, the reality of the show, it spawned out of CES pretty much because video games were getting too big for CES. Right. I first started going to CES to look at games, and it was my first show was in Chicago.
Yep, the winter.
Then, it was the winter
CES, and that was one of my first.
And it was probably 94 or around that time. I remember seeing Atari Jaguar there. Jeff Minter is the first time I met him in person. I met Tommy and the Shiny folks because they launched Earthworm Jim, and Donkey Kong Country was launched that same year, and that was a big time for me because I realized that was how big the industry was by going to that, because it was just this incredibly loud, very just insane party for video games. And the reason it was that is because there were so many retailers that were selling video games. Brick and mortar stores were selling tons of video games, and video games were being sold through brick and mortar stores. Digital had not arrived yet. And so the whole point of those shows was to get somebody from a Target or a Meyer Thrifty Acre or any of these retailers, anybody who carries video games, to make an order. And so they had to show off. And so they were trying to get your attention. They're trying to get you coming. They wanted you to sign paperwork right there on the spot. And then they also needed to, they basically needed to get the attention of the press. And again, before internet, you had to try to get magazines to give you any amount of real estate in a magazine. And so there's always a fight. It was like a war to get attention. And so millions and millions and millions of dollars were spent on these parties. I remember going to the Dodger Stadium party for Sony, and somebody there from Sony, I remember there was 5 bands. They had food from all around the world. Thousands of people were there, and these were big name bands they had there. They had they called them Little Kiss or something as well, and they had luchador wrestling and all this crazy shit just going on this whole night. And it was the craziest party I've ever been to. And I was talking to somebody at Sony. I'm like, how much does something like this cost? And I won't say it here because I don't think they wanted me to even share them. But it was just it was bigger than a game budget. Yeah, it was way bigger than a game budget. And it was just insane. I'm like, how can they spend all this money? But the reality was it was worth it because they were getting the real estate in every magazine. They were getting retail purchases because they were wowing all these people who were like, I want to go to this party again. And also, so I'm going to buy all this PlayStation stuff or whatever. And so that's all kind of gone because now you have Nintendo Direct and Sony doing their direct feeds. You have games that are digital outselling and outpacing brick and mortar and box games. All this stuff is just kind of dying off. The number of retailers that could possibly buy and make an order for your games is now 1/100th of the size. So it's you can't invest that kind of money anymore. So it's no wonder Sony and all these people are pulling out of shows like E3 because they don't get anything out of it. I love the show. I remember some of those. I don't think we'll ever see the likes of some of those big moments at E3 again, just because there's no reason for it. Right. It was Disneyland. You'd walk in and just everybody from around the world's there. Every major game developer is there. I remember meeting Peter Molyneux and meeting Dave Perry for the first time over there, and meeting all my heroes like Jeff Minter and all those guys. But everybody in the game industry, I kind of met through there. John Romero, all these guys, Carmack and all them. It's all through going to these shows, and you could just walk up and talk to these guys, and people were still able to talk shop. But at the same time, I remember being at I was at a Nintendo party of there's only hundreds of people there, and it was like the Black Eyed Peas are playing right there in front of your face, and then you're playing Mario Kart with Will.i.am afterwards, and all stuff. It's just like, why is this happening?
Right.
And it's just like bizarre, and that's not going to happen anymore, I don't think.
No.
And it's mainly because it's not worth it. And honestly, more people get more information through these Nintendo Directs and other direct feeds from all these different companies that there's no way to justify it.
Right, and
we had talked about this, Mike, on what was that, Mike? A couple episodes ago or a couple shows ago?
Yeah,
we had talked about this, Mike, and I kind of agree with you. It's not that the idea of the old E3, I mean, that was exciting, but things have changed so much. That was my argument on the episode that we talked about this, that I can see why Sony and maybe some other pulling out. It's just, I think that they're best served investing their money in other places now.
Yeah, I mean, the adventure is lost because of that. Because, I mean, really, you can turn on the Xbox when they have a major announcement and watch the announcement on the Xbox.
Right.
So like cell phones as well. It's like, I can get on my cell phone and do the stuff instead of like riding my bike as a kid over to meet up with somebody or whatever. We're just chatting now. It's like,
and every Joe with a camera phone, it used to be, I used to walk around the show floor with like a camcorder, and then I have to come home and take my Pinnacle box and make videos of all that. And I still have them, and it's really cool. I tell a story about how in 2006, was it 6 or 5, I got pulled into to play Halo 2 multiplayer. Oh, 3. I'm sorry. Duh. I got pulled in to play Halo 2 multiplayer behind the scenes, and Frankie O'Connor was there, and we were chatting it up, and and I got some great video of that. But I had to come home, and people had to wait like a week or two for us to get all this video up on the site and that kind of thing. And now, Square likes to have their own announcements when they announce a Final Fantasy remake. They have a special 1 hour thing just to do the date, and everybody with a cell phone camera, is there clapping pictures and putting them on social media. It's instant now, and
it is.
And that has really taken a lot of the journalism piece out of these. And I think that's why, a lot of journalists just. It's not they get beat out by Jack Frags, who gets first crack at every Call of Duty game now because he can get better coverage than IGN.
Influencers get the front of the line over like journalists.
Yeah, and that's I mean, that is insane to me. Coming from, I spent a lot of time covering this stuff. I'm very proud to say that a lot of my stuff is on the Internet Wayback Machine. So, like, I was going through and I'm like, hey, I wonder if I still remember my Death Jr. review. And sure enough, it's there. And, just that I can go look. My Dr. Moto review is still there. I think I gave it like an 85. I think I really liked it. But you don't have that anymore. And that mystique of, you could go and everybody that can do a YouTube channel does their own game reviews, and so it's saturated out, and there's no room for that anymore. I know a few journalists that go to E3, and now that it's open to the public, they're complaining because they're not getting the attention that we used to get, and that's and you're right. We're gonna miss. Like I'm gonna miss that warehouse Sega party in the warehouse with the girders and half drunk Peter Moore hanging from a girder yelling, "We're gonna kick Sony's ass!" I remember that was we're never gonna get those moments again. No. I was like fifth row when he rolled up the Halo 2 tattoo, and I'm like, we're never gonna get that again, and
But you know what? I miss a lot of things. Just like I know that there's a lot of physical copies of magazines. There's still some left, but I remember back in the day when Howard Phillips was president of Nintendo, and I'd have my subscription in Nintendo Power, and you'd smell that fresh new magazine and you'd thumb through it, and like, I know this is all silly stuff, but this is what I kind of miss that. Everything's so digital ebooks. I kind of actually like having something physical still in my hand, like the magazines. Great time.
Digitally, it doesn't read the same.
No, it doesn't.
I feel like you're skipping over stuff, and it's
It's the world's at a different pace right now. Really.
Do you remember, Peter? Like, I remember when I first got The Legend of Zelda, and I got that gold cartridge, and it came with that nice little booklet, you know, and you actually got an instruction manual, not something that you looked up online real quick, but there was something about having that little pamphlet, you know, those tangible things that I actually I still miss that.
Yeah. Like
you know, I got a funny story about the gold cartridge. When I first moved out to the Bay Area. One of the first things I had to do was fly up to Nintendo for Next Generation Game Magazine for their new slate of N64 games that were coming out where we had to do write-ups on. And so a whole bunch of journalists were brought up. I went up with Frank O'Connor, Frankie, when he was working for Game Players, Ultimate Game Players, I think. And then I went with Matt Casamassina, who was at IGN at the time. And so we went up and we're checking out all the games. And then we're sitting they divided us up at different tables. There was Minoru Arakawa, the president at the time, Howard Lincoln, and some other people there. And so we sat with Howard Lincoln. And Matt Casamassina innocently was asking about the Zelda game that they announced. And he's like, will it be a gold cartridge? And Howard Lincoln responded immediately. He's like, yes, it's going to go gold, like easily. We're predicting whatever. And so Matt Casamassina wrote it up on IGN that Zelda on N64 is going to come on a gold cartridge. And it's like, that's not what we meant. We were saying it's going to go gold.
Right.
And Matt's like, oh, well. And they're like, yeah, can you put a retract? So they were like trying to get a retraction in there. And then ultimately Nintendo decided, well, let's put on a gold cartridge. That's a good idea.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
You know, Next Generation magazine was honestly my second favorite all-time magazine. It was so deep for the time, especially with the Saturn and the and the PlayStation and the N64. My favorite magazine of all time actually was Die Hard. Die Hard was such a good one. I don't know if you guys remember, but they were a game store too. For a short time.
That's how they started.
I actually tried to get my grandfather to help me, to invest in me, to open one of those here in Maryland. I wanted to I got a couple of friends together. We were fresh out of college, and I'm like, you know what? We could do this. We could build a game store. We could be a Die Hard game store. And of course it flopped because, you know, Die Hard did die out. But I loved those, and I remember with Next Generation, I remember them printing a letter from, it was at the beginning where the notes, letters from the editor are, and it was the head of EA, and he was talking about why they were going to bury Sega. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
It was who was that at the time? Was it Riticello?
It wasn't Riccatello. It was pre-Riccatello. So it was either it was either Bing Gordon talking about it, or it was
might have been
Trip.
It might have been Trip because it was before Trip went to 3DO.
Yep. So it was probably Trip.
But they let him write this scathing why we are going to destroy Sega in the front of that magazine, and I was like, wow.
We had so many interviews where PR did not want us to print what people had said, because it was still, think about it, like the video game industry was still immature. It was born really in like the 70s, and by the 90s, only 20 years later, whereas film and all these other industries have been around forever, you had a lot of young people saying really dumb things. I remember we wanted to get Kelly Flock, who was at Sony, to talk smack about EA. I think it was. Yeah, I think it was Kelly was at Sony, and they're coming out with football games for PlayStation. Sony was coming out with Game Day, I think it was called, and then EA was coming out with Madden. And I remember Kelly, like, my coworker's like, all we got to do is get him drunk. He likes to drink, and he'll say whatever. So he just started going off on EA, and he was going off. I remember like EA was like touting Liquid AI. He's like, Liquid AI, the only Liquid AI is going to be like Liquid AI going down the leg of their pants when they see like Game Day.
Wow.
Yeah.
the next day, like Sony's like, you cannot print any of that. Like we'll pull out like funding, we'll do this. We won't give you any more stories.
Liquid AI, that's like scratch and sniff video games.
Blast processing.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, it's a good thing that you didn't print that, because of all of 989 Sports' games, Game Day was not the flag title that they want to. That
no,
was
not at all. Although I don't think EA shipped Madden that year either.
No, they're not. But I remember that year, Game Day was so broken that the backwards touchdowns that the guy ran off the screen. I mean, there was a lot wrong with that. So that's funny. That's a funny story.
It's it's that pre-NFL exclusivity that EA had. Like a lot of people don't realize, like NFL, you could make an NFL game on any platform and any company could. And then EA pulled that Hail Mary, so to say, and locked down the rights.
Yeah, but it unfortunately was one of the things that also kind of contributed to Sega's eventual downfall. Because I mean, and EA knew it. EA knew 2K was the better game. They still know that now, because if you notice, they really won't put out another NBA Live that's worth, they tried it a couple years ago, and then they realized the marquee game is NBA 2K. So, they know. They had great franchises that they've kind of buried. The NASCAR franchise EA had was good. MVP and Triple Play Baseball were great baseball games.
Fantastic.
I don't know what happened. They just decided we're just going to concentrate on our moneymaker, and that's John.
Annual releases as games got larger made it more and more challenging for them to pull it off, and particularly like EA, how their production philosophies and everything that kind of crippled in the rush to get a game out every year, whereas 2K managed to pull it off by one, like finding really good teams and retaining those teams and have them iterate in different ways, whereas EA just had to have like more and more and more every year. It was just a internal production philosophy that just got really hard for them to keep up.
Oh, Visual Concepts was also a special development studio. I mean,
they're great.
I remember the first time I saw an NBA 2K and the jerseys were moving independent of the bodies and things like that, and that all came from them. One of the stories I always love telling, that probably they've gotten tired of me telling, was the first time I saw NFL 2K83, and it was
and what did you see it on, Michael?
On a Dreamcast.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean one of those up on the wall?
Yeah.
I don't have Mike's room there, but so now is that the see?
Oh yeah.
Now, do you have the Japanese version? Because that's my import up on the wall there.
Oh, I have the one with the liquid cooling. I have that one.
Oh. Really?
I do have brand new mint condition VMUs and 6 mint condition controllers.
So funny you guys say that. I honest to goodness, just went out like 3 weeks ago and bought a whole new slate of batteries for my VMUs. Because I wanted to start, because I got the pound cable for the Hyperkin cable for the Dreamcast, and while it's flawed in that I can't stream with it, it actually does a really good job with the picture. So now I'm going back and playing old games, and now I need my old VMUs to work. So, I put the batteries back in them. Those,
this was a great console, though. I mean, it was compact. You had your port on the back for your internet. I mean, it was way ahead of its time.
It was.
This is still like really close to me. I love this console.
I mean, that's one of the reasons that that this past E3, when Microsoft rolled out Phantasy Star Online, I went berserk, because we saw the person walking forward, and I think Peter was on that show and somebody else, and I looked at and I watched the beginning of that trailer, and I said, no way. It can't be. And I rose out of my chair like a bird. Like and so, because I spent so much time on games like Phantasy Star Online.
Oh yeah.
I didn't do a lot of the RPGs that you guys did. My games were those kind of games, and I think Phantasy Star Online for me was the first real social game that I ever really played. When I got a little later in life, it was EverQuest Online Adventures for the PS2, where I could actually talk to people with the headset. But before that, I had the keyboard for the Dreamcast. I still do. It's in a drawer, and I was there talking to people. It was like, Destiny with the hub and all that stuff. That was kind of the first hub and spoke game where you could go in and you could find people to play with. And I'm jealous of the people who have figured out how to still play today, because I don't want to build a Raspberry Pi just to play online. I wish I wish it was easier than that. But there's the next thing you need to work on, Mike, is a Dreamcast, the Dreamcast days.
I agree. Dreamcast is awesome. And honestly, the graphics hardware in the Dreamcast in many ways is better than the PS2. You could have delivered almost any game that was on PS2 on the Dreamcast. It was just unfortunate that timing and business couldn't keep that thing afloat for a little longer.
The only negative thing about this console, Mike, that I could think of is inside, you had the battery that kept the internal time, the clock.
Yeah.
Now, I've taken mine, and I've had new batteries, and I've kind of had it modded so I can now replace that battery. It didn't really affect anything. It's just that battery had a limited time, and once that battery was gone, you power on your Dreamcast, you'd have to reset the date and time. But I've kind of got around that now. Yeah. So it was bugging me. So I went and I took both of my Dreamcasts and had that done. So now I don't have to worry about that. And if the battery goes, I can just replace it now.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah. You could do that with the Saturn. The Saturn had an actual CMOS battery compartment that really popped off. And so I need to do that with mine, because mine does do that. If I got to turn
Mike,
the time
you'll
on.
like it. It doesn't cost that much, and I think there were only like a couple games that it really affected. Like most of your normal games, I don't think it, but maybe there were a couple. I can't remember the name of the titles that kind of relied on that.
C-Man,
that's it.
Yeah.
Which I still have the microphone and all that. That was
so good.
That was my favorite of all. Still the greatest launch lineup ever. There's no console that has come close to that launch lineup.
The only other one that I like better, since is my Jungle Green Nintendo 64.
That's fantastic. Woo! That's so good.
I've even got the RAM expansion pack. If I open that up, and you can see the extra RAM and expansion pack for improved graphics, you got to have that.
Sure do. A lot of people don't agree with me on this, but I love Turok Rage Wars. A lot of people think it's just like another Turok game, but it's multiplayer only. Use the memory pack for higher frame rates and higher resolution. It's so good.
Right.
Nintendo 64 is what broke me of my Sega fanboyism. I was a diehard Sega fanboy for the longest time, and I actually worked at Games and Gadgets right before when it morphed into Electronics Boutique, and boy, I got into some nasty arguments, especially when Street Fighter 2 came out for the Super Nintendo, and I mean, it just knocked out. There was some arguing going on, and when I finally saw the N64, I took a shot at. I was like, all right, let me try Mario 64. That broke me. I was like, how did I miss out on Nintendo for all this time? I still love Sega.
Do you remember the level, Mike, with the liquid metal?
Yep.
Like when that first.
God,
that was
beautiful. Awesome. And now with Rare Replay being able to go back and play the old Banjo-Kazooie games and stuff like that. I mean, I realized, and then of course, the game of games on the Nintendo 64, GoldenEye. That was the I was like, how did I miss this for this long? And so I've never been anti-Nintendo since, though I don't have a Switch. But Sega will still always live in my heart. That's what I when I was in my late teens, early 20s, getting the Genesis, and my father bringing that home instead of the NES, and me crying, and then playing Altered Beast and going, well, now so I've told you that story, John, didn't I?
I don't know. I don't think you told me that.
Oh my God! So after the crash, and we heard about the NES. That's all I wanted. My dad worked for a toy store at the time, so I said I want a Nintendo and entertainment system. And for Hanukkah, he brought home a Sega Genesis. And I swear to goodness, I was mad at him. I cried. I was like, this is not what I asked for. I wanted an NES.
I did. Mine was opposite, Mike. I got the NES and I got the one with the robot and everything.
Oh, Rob. and my dad showed me the back of the box and goes, well, these look like games. And I'm like, I was like, and I went to my room. I was like, I don't want to talk to you, Dad. And I went to my room. And then after a while, I came downstairs. I'm like, all right, I'm going to try it out. So we hooked it up to the TV. The pack-in game was Altered Beast.
Right.
And I turned it on, and the screen just popped. This Altered Beast with the fly, and then all of a sudden, I heard, I started the game and I heard "Rise from Your Grave," and this this 5'8" guy, little Mario, and you got Big John, coming out of the ground, and I'm like, oh my god! And then when he turned into the wolf, and that was it. From then on, I had that. I had Decap Attack and I had Tasmania. Those are my first couple of Genesis games. And from then on, I was nothing but Sega. I was like, you can have your child's toy, your Fisher Price console. See, if Fastback, if Chris was here on the show tonight, he would be having a conniption right now because he's our Nintendo guy. But I was like, you could take your Fisher Price Mario and shove it, and I'm going to be over here playing this. And I was that guy that was out there going, blast processing. You can't do that. I believed all the hype and everything. It was horrible.
What I kind of miss about that though, Mike? I was the opposite. I got the NES and I had the robot, the Rob, and I got Duck Hunt, of course. I actually kind of miss the light gun games.
Yeah.
And I heard that they were working on a gun. Maybe I'm not mistaken, but somebody was working on that might work with HD TVs because I think that's part of the reason they haven't used them, I think.
Polymega is working on it.
There's tech now that can actually do that. You can there's different solutions where you can do it for MAME on your PC. You can do all that kind of stuff too. But some of the best solutions what they basically do is they calibrate off of, it's very similar to the Vive, with you have a couple of lighthouses, essentially. And then the gun just triangulates from your angle and everything from that. So you can put them at each side of, say, a big projection on a wall, and you'll be able to track to that and all this stuff now. And then what you have to do though is intercept the video signal. And that gets a little more complicated because you have to know the light reaction to the gun. Because a lot of these guns would basically use the screen and the display, the CRT, the light would reflect in and that sort of stuff. So the new guns basically have the same interface. They don't use any of that tech, but they report back the same kind of data.
That's cool.
Nice.
What's your take on those kind of? Before anything else, I was really interested in the Polymega, and I'm not sure if I am anymore because I've got HDMI cables for my current consoles. But what's your take on that?
Those guys are great. I've talked to them quite a bit. They've been out to our studio and stuff like that, and we've seen some of their stuff. And they're solving a particular problem that some people want solved, and that is they want to use their old media on a newer system, and that's CDs and all that sort of stuff. And I think people are in different courts on this and believe things or have different philosophies about it. But for people who have, for instance, stockpiles of PlayStation games still, this is a great solution because it has a drive that can read PlayStation discs and it's got a decent emulator in there and everything like that. So it works in that regard, with cartridges or whatever else they decide to support with each module. It gives you that experience. For me, my tastes lie more in the FPGA world, where analog with the Analog NT, the Super NT, the Mega. I think I have the Mega SG back here, that sort of stuff, and that stuff I like because of the way I can output the video and that sort of stuff, and the emulation.
The Mega SG, that's the the cartridge that does the. Am I thinking of the right thing?
No, this is the it's the FPGA little console, and here's a cartridge.
Right,
that you're thinking of, the Mega SD. So there's the Mega SG and the Mega SD here. So the Mega SD will do CD-ROM emulation and all that stuff out of the cartridge.
Right.
And then this does the hardware emulation of the Genesis. So this will output HDMI, and with the DAC that's coming out, you can do RGB and all that stuff out. And if you guys are familiar with FPGA, that means it's configured in a way that it's running basically cycle accurate to the original hardware. Emulation, even some of the best emulation in the world, still has buffers, delay on audio, and all stuff. When you play on FPGA directly, say you put this to a direct CRT, it's running at full speed with almost no latency to the comparable to the actual hardware.
Nice.
Yeah, I had seen a lot about the Mega SD, and I was really interested in it. And the thing about the Polymega it was before I got into these. To be honest with you, these little retro HDMI cables are not bad.
No, they're not.
They're not. The Hyperkin actually, to me, has the best quality, and you've got the switch on the side that can go 4.3 or 16.9.
Yeah.
So, like, one of the first games I popped in, there were 5 or 6 that I popped in on the Saturn. One of my favorite Saturn games, which is a little more obscure because it's not made by Sega themselves, was Shinobi Legends.
Yep.
Shinobi Legions is what over here. And it was gorgeous. And I didn't see a lot of the artifacting and stuff I thought I would see. So then I popped in like Astal, which is beautiful game. I popped in Clockwork Knight, Bug, and then went after I don't know if you guys remember Panzer Dragoon, and then Cyber Speedway. Yeah. I was really impressed. It's really, really impressed. And so I kind of fell off maybe I don't need a all-in-one box like that.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame because I think there's so much competition now that like the time it's taking for the Polymega to get to market, it's almost like it might almost be unnecessary by the time it hits.
Right.
So it's interesting. I think there's going to be people who want that modular system, who want to think about anything and still like hit the closet and grab all their old stuff and get rid of their old hardware. That's fine. But I love the old hardware. I like having it around, and then I like upgrading the old hardware to modern standards.
Sure.
I do too. Yeah.
The only reason that I had thought of getting it at the time too was the one thing I don't have, which the Mega SD might solve for me, is I don't have a Sega CD player. I've got a 32X sitting around, but my Genesis and Sega CD are long gone. They, like all the other ones that should be in a landfill, the lasers, failed on it. So
yep.
I've been and that's why I haven't picked up another one, as I've been really leery about getting them. So I have been using an emulator and then just taking the CD and popping it in, and that's been okay. But I'd like to play it on my larger screen. So it's the only reason that I still had the Polymega in mind. But then the Mega SD came along, and I'm really considering that instead, if I can find a suitable. What's the SG is just a modern version of the Genesis.
It's not just a modern version. It's an incredibly capable modern version. It's the latest FPGA field programmable gate array hardware that is running cycle accurate, better than probably most other things you'll run on other than the original hardware. But also you can install extra cores. So you can put the SG-1000, what other ones? Master System, Game Gear on there as well.
Oh, wow.
And then with the cart, you can either root it yourself. There's a way to root it to put ROMs on directly, so you don't have to interchange cartridges. Or you get the Mega SD card, and that allow you to have Sega CD as well. So you can put ISOs, backups of any of your CDs. You can put them directly onto an SD card in there, and it's all menu driven. You can run games that way.
Oh, yeah, wow. I think I'm gonna have that. That might be where I end up, because it really is Sega. That's the only thing left. It doesn't. Does it handle 32X?
Not yet, but it probably will, because FPGA allows people to create that architecture and then just with a firmware update add that hardware to it, because it's basically rearranging all these like millions of gates to be the exact hardware that the 32X and the Genesis and everything had before. So you're able to just through a firmware update add hardware to that and then have that work. So awesome. I think that's coming. And if you haven't like explored like the analog series they have the handheld coming up right now, the Game Boy and all stuff, like look into those systems too. The FPGA based systems like that are phenomenal.
Yeah.
And you can use real controllers and everything like that, whereas a lot of these other systems have like alternate controller ports or USB and that sort of thing. Real controllers that go straight to the IO goes straight to the board is really amazing.
Yeah.
No latency.
Yeah, looking at the analog site, so $189 though. After I just plopped down $100 for the founders of Amico. Yeah, so maybe I'll just wait and I can keep emulating for now.
Oh, come on, Michael. It's only money. We're getting older. We've only got a few years left.
Yeah. Enjoy yourself.
Well, if I buy that, my wife will make sure of that. So.
Oh, shoot.
Treat yourself.
Yeah, that doesn't happen with 3 kids in the house.
I understand.
Yeah. So we've gone, we're almost at, so over here it's almost midnight. I wasn't sure. Look, I promised everybody that we wouldn't go 4 hours like we did with Tommy. Tommy would have taken, we'd have been 8 o'clock in the morning and he'd still be talking and he'd still be amped up. So
you got to stop him. That's what you got to do.
Yeah, we had to jump in and ask things. Otherwise, he would have continued to talk. He would still be talking now. He'd be over on one of the other screens still talking. But he was awesome. And but I've I know it's getting late over here, and I know you've given us almost over 2 hours of your time tonight, and I want to savor some because, in all honesty, I do want you to come back on. So.
Oh yeah, no problem.
So well, what we do is with everybody. You're now one of us, so you've now been inducted into the NLG alumni. Anytime you want. If you're hanging around and you're done early on a Thursday and you're like, I'm gonna go talk some games with those guys. All you have to do is say, hey, Mike, you got room for me? And the answer is always going to be yes.
So just pick up the red phone and just be like,
that's right. That's right. Just shoot me a Twitter DM because we're friends like that. And you say, hey, Mike, you got room for me tonight? And absolutely, because
Mike, I wanted to say I love my NLG brothers, but I'm so glad I got the chance to meet and talk with you tonight. Your accomplishments, the things you've done in the gaming industry, just talking to you and hearing your energy gets me excited. And all the guys on the show, they know how much I love and I'm passionate about gaming. But I want to reiterate what Michael said. Thank you for your time. I'm sure you've got hundreds of hours or more of amazing stories, but I'm just so proud of this moment right now. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, no, this is awesome. I'm just happy to be here. And honestly, this is really comfortable sitting down with you guys and talking about this stuff because we obviously grew up with a lot of the same passions. Some of us here are the same age pretty much, except for your little kid over there. Who's probably sitting there going these old farts, what do they keep talking about all this stuff? But,
Frankie just looks that way. He used to have facial hair.
Yeah.
Nah, but yours isn't graying like mine. That's
right. See, I try to tell these guys.
That's why I don't have any because it would be gray and all different colors. It's
yeah, it's mine's just all these different shades, a gradient going way down.
Yes, and then I go
like a Sega Sunset.
Yes, and I go, hey, Jacob, my 15-year-old, this side's yours, and Seth, that's yours. Spencer, this is all you, my 5-year-old. So I mean seriously, and I'm glad that you kind of took really quickly to our format here because I know whenever somebody wants to have a developer on, they've got to write down questions and you got and they're great shows that do that. We love to just have conversations, and we feel like we get more out of that because you really are one of us as far as gaming history and what you've played, and you bring me back to my youth, and then to see that what I love is that you're not still just at it, you're pumping your life into it, and you've got stuff coming. You're not slowing down at all. That's the great part. Is I can't wait to see the other 4 Intellivision. I'm serious. I cannot wait to see the other 4 Intellivision games. Can you hint at anything?
I really can't.
You've tried that 3 or 4 times. I've got hash marks written down here. Sly devil.
Oh no, I wish I could. I really wish I could, because like I think you'll be very happy. I can tell you this: you're gonna be very happy. I know you guys. I know what you guys are looking for. I think you're gonna be pretty happy with at least 4 of the 5 minimum. But yeah, like we have those coming along. We have the Samurai Showdown collection coming, which I think people are gonna be very excited about. There's stuff in that collection we haven't announced yet that I think people are gonna be excited about. There's we're starting a new line of Digital Eclipse games that are like basically called Gold Master. Right now, I think we're calling them Gold Master Collection, where we focus on one particular game and really go wide with all the extra background data and all that stuff about the game and show you stuff you haven't seen before. We're very excited about that. Once we got some more stuff coming up with Sony and Microsoft that we'll be announcing soon, probably in time for E3 as well. And then February 21st on Netflix is an animated show for kids called Glitch Techs. That was the first time I've ever worked on an animated show in which I came in as a consulting producer.
Wow.
Kind of come up with the technology in the show, the culture, and how the characters interact with the technology. And also I had the opportunity to really contribute to the whole arc of the show and stuff that goes on there. That was one of the best experiences I've ever had. And the showrunners on that show, Eric Robles and Dan Milano, phenomenal gamers, know everything about games, like one of us as well. And that show is going to be really, if you have kids, it's a really cool show. It's very diverse, and the game references are awesome. You'll see me, I think, in one of the episodes briefly as a background character.
Nice.
So it's pretty cool. And so that's going to be coming out. And then July 3rd coming up is going to be Free Guy, in which I was also a consulting producer on the movie. It's with Ryan Reynolds, in which he plays a banker who suddenly realizes that he's just an NPC.
You're involved in that?
Yeah.
Wow.
So keep your eyes out for that one. It's like the trailer didn't really show you much, and it's got so much going for it, and it's really cool. And that reunited me with the person who brought me into that was actually Zach Penn, who was the host and director of the Atari Game Over documentary. And so he's the screenwriter on that, and he introduced me to Sean Levy, who was the executive producer of Stranger Things, and did a whole bunch of stuff from like Real Steel and Night at the Museum, all stuff. And so got to work with those guys on the screenplay and stuff like that for Free Guy.
Nice. Real quick, who's Stephen Frost?
Stephen Frost is an amazing producer, somebody I'd known since I moved out to California, who used to work over at PlayStation Magazine, over Imagine Media and IGN. He sits 2 desks over.
Yeah, so he's in our chat. He said, "Now I know why Mike was talking to himself in the office." So you're still at your regular office? You're not home?
Not at home. I'm at the office.
Oh man, see, now I feel bad keeping you this long. Holy crap!
No, it's perfectly fine. I end up working late a lot. So
please tell your wife we also said thank you for because otherwise you probably would be either that or going home. So
tonight was the perfect night because they had a whole bunch of other stuff they had to do anyway, like with the kids. So that was already planned. So this is an opportunity for me to not have to do that.
Nice. Well, I am. We are honored that Steven is in our chat. So yeah, that's awesome. So next time he'll have to come and sit next to you.
You guys should have him on because he was at Sega for a while. He's got some great stories, working on a lot of games. You guys should actually have him on as a guest.
Okay, Steven, you hear him. All right, we're gonna set this up. Because that's that. Now you're getting into my territory.
Honestly, I don't know anybody who loves Sega Saturn more than Steven does, and I actually a lot of stuff going on in the retro scene right now. I kind of rely on him because he has his ear to the ground on everything that's going on, and he helps me navigate a lot of that. We have this Slack channel that's Retro Hotness, we call it, and he's always posting up this really cool stuff in there. And I have a hard time keeping up with him. He's got a lot of good stuff.
Oh my God! You said Sega Saturn. That's so.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna tell you, we did a Sega Roundtable show here about 5 months ago with a bunch of guys from. I had guys from a couple of other podcasts that are kind of like ours. 4 Guys with Quarters, the Iron Lords. and a friend of mine who's a really big Sega guy, and we just sat and chopped up Sega for like the good old days of Sega for a couple hours, and the Saturn was, I mean, that I have a distinct love for the Saturn that you know, like I said, I've got, like, mine is modded with a switch on the side for import games so that I could get all the Fire Pro Wrestling and stuff. And I have it's hard to see up there below the Dreamcast on the wall, but there's a net link back there. I've got NetLink games that we could still play because that actually was peer to peer. So if I knew somebody else with a Saturn and a NetLink, we could play Duke Nukem. So I have a special love of Saturn that not many other people share with me. So I just said in the chat we're bringing him on next because if we want, I can go all night talking Sega.
Saturn's a great game. Tengoku is the name of the shooter that is like you basically, it's a shooter that takes place in a video game world where you're like flying over an arcade and has all this classic video game stuff all in it. Do you have you played that one?
Yep. I've got Radiant Silvergun. I've got
Burning Rangers. I love
Burning Rangers. So I don't open my copy of Burning Rangers anymore because apparently it's worth like $400. So I leave it. I've got that
last run of games. I have Burning Rangers, Panzer Dragoon Saga.
I do not have Saga.
House of the Dead.
I should. Yeah, it's one of those. If House of the Dead I have, but Saga I don't, and that's one of those. If I knew then what I know now, I would have. You know, it's like Magic Knight Rayearth. There's no way I'm buying that now. Because
I've got that one as well. I've got, because basically when I was at the magazine, that stuff would get sent to us, so I just held on to all that stuff. Yep. So I have shrink wrap still Panzer Dragoon Saga. I have an open Panzer Dragoon Saga. I've got a shrink wrap Burning Rangers, a shrink wrap House of the Dead, and then I have a prototype Panzer Dragoon Saga when it was called a Cell.
Oh wow!
And it's got the prototype disc with the key disc to boot it up and everything. So I love the Saturn.
Oh, I did too.
I call those games the college fund for my kids.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah, exactly. So man,
God, I mean, being able to play Virtua Fighter oh my God, it was amazing.
Virtua Fighter 2 is really nice on it.
Oh, real good. That actually was very impressive at the time. Virtua
Fighter really 2 was.
So I was impressed that they gave us Remix. You know, that was a pretty nice move by them, knowing how kind of really tough Virtua Fighter was. So getting Remix was really nice, actually.
I think they really started to figure things out, and then it was just like they had to move on, and it was kind of a shame because that hardware is really unique. It does it does things in quads basically versus like your typical polygons, and you can do really cool stuff with that if you understand it. And like you saw Tomb Raider and everything like that too. Once you figured it out, you can do really incredible rendering, and you can get speed out of it and everything too.
Well, and I think part of the problem is that really unless you got their libraries, it was hard for developers to take that advantage, and that's a lot of what I heard coming into the Dreamcast, and when I talked to developers about older Saturn games and things like that. A lot of it had to do with not being able to use. They would use one of the SH2s, but not the other. So they could use one to do, the big thing was using one to do your sprites, the other to do your special effects. And they, of course, Sega figured out how to burn to the metal like that, but a lot of the third-party developers just didn't. And once the PlayStation came out, and it was so much easier to develop for that, a lot of the developers just didn't want to take the time.
We jumped to the path of least resistance, really, at the end of the day. Right. So it's like if you can, like when the Xbox came out, it was the same way. If you can develop on the Xbox, you can develop on anything like PC and everything else. And likewise now, like developing for PlayStation or Xbox or PC and Switch is almost the same. That's because you have to have it easy. But like, there's something really cool about trying to push hardware. And to me, I love that challenge. Like when we were doing Game Boy Color stuff, we were always trying to push the hardware. We put Dragon's Lair, for instance, on Game Boy Color, and so it's the full motion video of Dragon's Lair on a cartridge, at a time that nobody thought you could do that stuff. We love those kind of challenges. We put Minecraft on the 3DS. That thing is gigantic, but we managed to squeeze all that code onto the 3DS. We love those kinds of challenges.
Wow.
Yeah, those are awesome. And I actually have it because my kids like to play it. So I know that challenge well, and you guys pulled it off pretty nicely.
Thank you.
So all right, so Stephen Gabe, I'm gonna follow Stephen. We're gonna work this out, and because I mean I'm glad you didn't lead with I love the Saturn, because that's all we would have talked about.
Gotta save some for Stephen. He's the one you gotta really talk to.
Yeah. It was great, and man, this has been a fun night, Mike, and I'm serious. Anytime you want to come on with us, we have people to do that. Rick Lagnese, who used to work for Warhorse and now works for Fextra Life, he's one of those guys. He just jumps on, talks games with us. You're welcome to do that anytime. It doesn't have to be, hey, here's what's going on at Digital Eclipse. If you just want to come and chat, I mean, I'd love to. And of course, we'll talk on Twitter and things like that. I always love your snark. I really do. I don't know. I like his brain is always working. I don't know how he can come up with this stuff. And I'm expecting to see it in games now.
That's my outlet. Like IDARB was kind of my outlet for some of that stuff, and IDARB too, probably more of it. But like whenever I'm compiling or I'm doing something, or I'm in the middle of something, or I'm in a meeting that I'm not engaged in or whatever, it's like I'm always tweeting.
yes, you are. I love it. So and I love the story. You don't have to get into it now, but there are videos on from you about how IDARB came to be, and I always love that story. I always loved watching because I remember when you started it and seeing all the feedback and turning into what it turned into. It shouldn't have been a surprise that it was that much of a success. It was that times. Honestly, it was that era, that period of times, Rocket League. Rocket League just kind of came out of nowhere and just kind of caught everybody.
Yep.
IDARB caught a lot of us. And then, trying to open up all the recipes. And I got a couple of, like you could go on YouTube and look up IDARB songs. And you can, somebody's got like the best 50 songs that he's created in IDARB. And I'm like, I've got a couple of them. But I'm like, some of these folks are just like perfect.
They're crazy. So, there's people who there's this rapper in New York who used our music editor to do some back channel tracks on some of his tracks on a CD, and we got a CD in one day, and I was just like, this is amazing.
I remember that site. Steven worked for Dreamcast Life. I worked for Dreamcast HQ. That was my first journalism job, was writing for that site, and I remember Dreamcast Life. Steven, I'm gonna work him over. I figure it'll take 3 years, because that's how it goes, right? And then 3 years later he'll be on.
No. Here's the thing: like Steven keeps me on track for things. He's the producer, so he's the one who's always on time. He'll come in. He'll come in quick.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And again, anytime you want, Mike. Seriously.
Awesome. This
was such a great night. I really enjoyed it. I want to get you out of here because it is after midnight over here. So I just, I know I badgered you for this, but it was well worth it.
Keep badgering me. I can't wait to come back on. And honestly, I think probably worst case after E3 it gets a lot lighter. But even some of these weeks coming up here, we'll just keep talking. It'd be awesome to come back on.
Awesome. Yeah. So like you see, you feel the itch, before
I do.
Seriously.
You guys talk about the stuff I love. Let's keep it going.
Right. I'm dead serious. All you have to do is DM me and say, hey, Mike, you got room for me? And we'll make, awesome. Trust me, I will bring people all the way around the screen if I have to. So have I want to, again, thank you. And I hope you have a great rest of the evening and weekend. Yep. So, I'm looking forward to Night Stalker. My goodness.
I can't wait for you guys to play it.
So everybody in the chat room, thank you so much. I want to thank Stephen Frost for jumping in, your producer. I mean, this is what it's all about for us, and we love, it's all about games with us, and enjoying that. And everybody who is in the chat room tonight, thank you guys so much for hanging out. We got some new people in here too, which was great. and then of course Peter, John, and Frankie. And Frankie, you've been like staring at something all night.
I've been working on some Castlevania games.
Ooh, all right. I guess I can excuse you for that. Did you have anything you wanted to ask him before we got him here?
Not that I can think of offhand. I was just looking over all the stuff he had done, and like Dark Void Zero was one that stood out to me because I love Dark Void, and I completely missed that game because I don't really ever game on my phone, but realized it's on PC, which I have a decent one now, so I can finally play that.
I think it'll run on any PC. It's so old school, so you're good.
I haven't had like an actual PC for a while, so it's because once phones kind of became prominent and my old motherboard fried, I was like, I don't feel like doing this again. So it wasn't until like last year that we got a decent PC. So I'm finally
now you got a lot of catching up to do.
On stuff.
Yeah.
Too much catching up to do. But I guess my only question is: are there any games that you had worked on in the past that you had to abandon, maybe for some reason, that you would like to go back to?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. There were a few of those. One was the Gauntlet game we're making for DS for Nintendo. So Nintendo had shown up one day and was asking us if we would want to do an all-new original Gauntlet for the DS before the DS launched. And it was a great opportunity. So we started working with Nintendo Japan on that. I would love for that game to finally come out. It was finished. It was ready to go to manufacturing. And then Nintendo was basically lighting up a whole bunch. They were getting a whole bunch of IP for a whole bunch of games because they were worried that the PSP was going to eat their lunch for DS. So they wanted to get a whole bunch of games that could compete. And then once they realized the PSP wasn't going to do that, they just wanted to rely on their own IP and not push anybody else's. So they let us shop Gauntlet to other people and all that stuff, but it just really was hard to get off the ground after that. But it went out to some magazines, and Retro Gamer magazine gave it an 80 or an 84. And some of the other reviews were like 90s and stuff like that. So it was reviewing well, but it never came out. I'd love for that one to come out. Maybe Digital Eclipse can find a way to get that out there. And then
Amico.
Yeah, Amico. That'd be good on Amico. Actually,
I tell you, a Gauntlet game on Amico that my kids could play with me.
And we had worked on the Virtual Console arcade stuff. We were working on Donkey Kong Jr., Mario Brothers, and Donkey Kong 3 for Nintendo. And what was cool about that at the time is you could play on the Wii, pause it, and open up your DS, and it would download to your DS, and you can keep playing it there and pause it and then upload it back to the Wii. And so you can just keep playing games and all that stuff. And we developed all this tech, and we were working with Japan on that. That would have been cool to come out. And like, there's a whole other story I can't even tell as to why that didn't come out, and it had nothing to do with us and nothing really to do with Nintendo, but had something to do with somebody a long time ago. So that one didn't happen, and there's so many other ones. I have so many unfinished games.
I need a Marble Madness or Smash TV, man.
I would love to. We've pitched Warner on doing those so many times. I'm hoping one of these days they'll finally listen. But we had started working on a new Marble Madness for the Nintendo DS, which was a multiplayer Marble Madness with new levels and all that stuff. It was really cool. And then what was the other one you mentioned? You mentioned
Smash TV.
Oh yes. So we've done several prototypes for a new Smash TV that unfortunately didn't off the ground because it's too violent or too whatever. And we're like, well, that's kind of what Smash TV is all about. So we try to make it more cartoony
and there was no ending to it.
Yeah, really? No ending to it. You couldn't get to the Pleasure Dome.
Yeah, you didn't know that, John?
Yeah, but the announcer's voice, big money. Big they didn't program the end of the game. But it was so fun, it didn't matter. I mean, it's kind of like how many Atari games did we play for hours that there was no ending? Missile Command.
Check it out. Dan Filner, who does work for us here at Digital Eclipse, he found out that ending is in the game, and he fixed the ROM, and you can actually get to the end.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
So Google it, look it up. The Pleasure Dome existed in the game. It was just a little bug.
I'll have to look that up, Mike.
Yeah. And if you can't find it, let me know. I'll give you the links to it all.
That's funny.
You can actually get to the end of the game. Just like Impossible Mission on the Atari 7800, you couldn't actually beat it because there was a bug. likewise in Smash TV.
Now, if somebody were to make a Marble Madness, so I would like even if they could do it with the Amico, I'd like some kind of rollerball though that kind of simulated the arcade. That's something with that game that made that game, because when I go to the arcade, or that's kind of what made the game challenging, was guiding that marble.
You know, so Mark Cerny made that, who the chief architect of the PlayStation 4, did Spyro and worked on Spyro and Crash Bandicoot. Genius kid. He was 17 when he made that game.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
17 years old. His mom, he would have his mom drop him off at Atari and go and start working, and he did like the graphics, the programming, all that. It's so crazy. That game is so beautiful, and it was just a kid.
And that's such great music.
It does. It has incredible music. And I remember sitting at a lunch with him in Atlanta during E3, and I was with Chris Charla and Mark Cerny. Were eating lunch, and he's writing on the back of a napkin and explaining why Sega Saturn had dirty pixels. And like, if you know what I'm talking about, it's like you notice that like the pixels, things are a little dingy, but it's not in a bad way. But it's just like the way the process of the signal. He knew exactly schematically why it happens and where the traces would go over the wrong things and cause that noisy signal. So it was just like, I remember these random things. And Mark Cerny did Marble Madness was that. But like the math and the physics and the collision and everything that he did for Marble Madness was genius. I would love to just do a new game in that same kind of engine, because the sequel that Atari tried to make after he left that never came out, called Marble Man, I think it was Marble Madness 2 Marble Man, terrible, awful game. So many people want that game released. I get it, but like it's terrible. It's not worth it. It'll just make you hate games. So I love that we're saving it and preserving it and that sort of thing. It's a good thing to look at. But like Marble Madness needs a real true sequel.
It does.
Oh, it does.
And I'm just gonna say, I mean, this isn't obviously a real controller, but you could do the trackball on the Amico controller in some fashion. It would be
the sensitivity of the dial could do it, but it won't feel like a trackball. I agree. We have a Mark X in our arcade back here, and
see that part of it was good. You got going one way, and then you'd have to kind of spin that ball back fast the other way to keep it from falling off the edge.
You use both hands. You're just like swinging both hands against that trackball to get it
to get it just right. I know, because it never quite. I had it for the PC. It never quite worked out, real well with a joystick.
Right.
Never quite made it just that way. And of course I tried it with the Genesis when it came out, when EA published it, and it never quite was the right They're
all noble efforts, but a trackball, it was built for trackball.
Yep. But see, Tommy said, "Oh yeah, we're talking about Marble Madness." So I'm going to take what you said earlier in the show about I'm going to apply that logic and just I'm going to will myself into a sense of false reality.
There you go.
Oh.
Well, here's that's a big wish. I mean, man, I would love to have that. I've been wanting a really good Marble Madness for a few years now. So
imagine 4-player Marble Madness. How awesome that would be.
Oh my God!
Oh God!
Trying to knock everybody else off the
awesome. Yeah. So another one that we had worked on that never got done. So remember Any Channel, the guys who did that game PO'd for 3DO?
Oh my God! Yes.
Right.
So the developer was Any Channel. They were developing a Marble Madness for us, a Digital Eclipse for Midway, probably 99 or 2000, and it was a awesome like refactoring of Marble Madness. It was for PlayStation, and that ended up getting canceled because they were worried that nobody would care about Marble Madness. It wasn't a big enough IP, but it was like all recreated. It had like and it was still isometric and all that stuff. And then they had battle arenas where you're just trying to knock your other people off the arenas. That was the most fun part. So it was using the multi-tap on the PlayStation. You'd have 4 people trying to knock each other off of these like set up little ramps and arenas and stuff like that. So you're just ramming marbles. It was so good. It was so fun.
Awesome.
Oh my goodness. All right, so now we're at 12:20.
All right, we gotta get going.
We gotta get.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
Oh,
that was
Mike,
awesome.
Thank you so much, man. My goodness, because if we don't, we're gonna be here all night, and then
don't trigger any more memories. I'll keep going.
Yeah, and then I'm gonna feel let's save some of these. So we'll have you on soon. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So
sounds good.
All right, Mike, have a great night, and tell Steven I'll be talking to him, and Gentlemen,
nice meeting you, Mike. Awesome having you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for coming on the
show. Everybody have a great night. Have a great weekend. We will see you next Thursday night here, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the NLG channel. And, man, play on, gamers.
Game on, guys.
Awesome. Game on.
Let me do the outro here.
Tradition to talk over the outro. For fun. I don't know why I'm on such a Castlevania kick lately.
Especially since you're not in the outro anymore. I gotta get you back into the videos now.
Have you played the X68000 version of Castlevania?